Hello, where curiosity gets cozy and mysteries unfold in a way that doesn't demand you to solve them before sleep. Tonight, we're heading somewhere most of us will never go in person, a place so remote and so hidden that even scientists who spend years preparing for expeditions only glimpse small fragments of it. Antarctica, a vast continent wrapped in ice, bigger than Europe, taller than many mountains, harsher than almost anywhere else on Earth. And yet, for centuries, it has been the canvas for imagination, because when you look at a place this inaccessible, this concealed beneath miles of frozen layers, it's hard not to wonder what it might be hiding. And among the most captivating questions people ask is whether Antarctica could contain remnants of civilizations older than any we've ever known. Not just penguins, glaciers, and research stations, but something human, ancient, perhaps forgotten, a possibility that borders on science fiction, but lingers long enough to spark curiosity. Before we start unwrapping those icy thoughts, let me ask you something. Where are you listening from tonight? And what does the world outside your window look like right now? Is it warm and filled with city sounds, or quiet and dark, except for the glow of a street lamp? Maybe you're somewhere in between, listening while you wind down from a day that stretched a little too long. Wherever you are, it feels strange and yet fitting that we'll to hope so. Together, and hartikam, and firsting you mais shoes mahout. If you find this exploration soothing, or just a nice way to drift into curiosity before you rest, it would mean a lot if you tapped the like button, maybe subscribed, or even shared this little corner of calm with someone else who might enjoy it. It helps this space reach more wanderers who are searching for something thoughtful to fall asleep to. Now, let's take a slow breath and settle in. Because the story of Antarctica isn't just one of snow and silence. It's also a story of how humans project our oldest questions onto the last great blank spaces on the map. And tonight, instead of thinking about what Antarctica is in the present, we're going to wander into what it might have been, what it could still hold beneath its frozen armor, and why so many people throughout history have looked at it and whispered that maybe, just maybe, the first civilizations of Earth could have left their traces there. Antarctica feels like the perfect stage for these kinds of ideas, because it's both incredibly real and deeply mysterious. Unlike the lost cities of the jungle or the forgotten temples of deserts, it doesn't let us dig easily. Almost everything is buried under ice sheets that are not just a little thick, but 2 miles deep in some places. Imagine trying to peel back the layers of history when those layers are frozen solid and stacked, taller than any skyscraper. That's why even today, we know more about the surface of Mars than the landmass under Antarctica's ice. Satellite scans give us glimpses, radar tells us shapes, but the actual ground is almost entirely unseen. For storytellers, explorers, and even scientists, that kind of mystery is irresistible. If anywhere on Earth could hide something massive and ancient without us knowing, it's here. And that's where the idea of civilizations comes in. Human history, as far as archaeology can confidently show, stretches back maybe 10,000 years for organized cities and agriculture, and much longer for small communities and hunter-gatherers. But the Earth is unimaginably older. Modern humans themselves have been around for at least 200,000 years. That's a lot of time for stories to get lost, cultures to rise and vanish, and evidence to be erased by shifting seas, volcanoes, or yes, even ice. So, when people look at Antarctica, they sometimes wonder if it could be one of those erased chapters, locked away, where no one can yet see it. This curiosity isn't entirely new. Long before anyone confirmed that Antarctica even existed, people had already imagined it. Ancient Greek philosophers proposed the idea of a great southern landmass, Terra Australis, balancing the known continents of the north. It wasn't found on evidence, but on symmetry. They believed the Earth should have balance, and so there must be land down there. Maps across centuries sometimes included sketches of a southern continent, based on little more than rumor and speculation. By the time explorers finally saw the ice in the early 19th century, the myths were already older than the sails on their ships. The unknown was a magnet, and Antarctica pulled in imaginations like few places could. One of the most talked about pieces of evidence that fuels speculation about lost civilizations under the ice is an old map. The Piraeus map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral, seems to show parts of South America with surprising accuracy for its time, and some claim it also shows the northern coast of Antarctica free of ice. If that interpretation is true, it would mean someone mapped the continent long before modern exploration, and at a time when it should have been buried in glaciers. Most scholars explain the map differently, suggesting it's a distorted copy of South American coastlines, but the idea that it could depict Antarctica continues to attract attention. It's the kind of small detail that, once noticed, becomes hard to forget. There are also the myths that echo faintly through cultures across the world. Stories of lands beyond the south wind, of frozen realms or forgotten kingdoms at the edge of the world. Some say these are nothing more than imagination shaped by geography, but others wonder if myths sometimes carry faint memories of real places, stretched and twisted, sparking by generations until they become legend. And when those legends align with a real place we can barely touch, like Antarctica, the speculation almost writes itself. Of course, we can't talk about ancient civilizations in Antarctica without also talking about how climates change. Antarctica wasn't always an ice desert. Millions of years ago, it was green, covered in forests, rivers, and teeming with life. Fossilized plants have been found, along with remains of animals that would look more at home in Mikotan, a tropical swamp, than on a frozen wasteland. As the Earth shifted, as continents drifted, and climates cooled, Antarctica became the place we know today. But those discoveries remind us that under the ice lies a land that has lived many different lives. And while the timeline makes it unlikely that humans were there during its warm eras, the idea isn't impossible enough to silence speculation. People naturally ask, if we're finding fossils of trees and dinosaurs under the ice, what else could be waiting? Even modern science keeps Antarctica mysterious. Radar scans reveal mountains the size of the Alps hidden under ice. Lakes sealed off for millions of years, like Lake Vosto, hold water untouched by sunlight. Magnetic anomalies, deep beneath the surface, hint at structures we can't yet explain. Each of these discoveries feeds both science and speculation, often blurring the line between them. Because while scientists carefully describe data in terms of geology and physics, the human mind can't help but imagine ruins instead of ridges, temples instead of tectonic shifts. And maybe that's the real reason Antarctica so often finds itself at the center of these theories. It's not just that it could be hiding something, it's that we need places like this to hold our imagination, to remind us that the Earth still has corners we don't fully understand. Places where you can honestly say, we don't know. And in that not knowing, entire civilizations of possibility can live, at least in our thoughts. Now, as we drift deeper into this story, keep that feeling close. Antarctica as both a scientific frontier and a human canvas. Ice as a barrier and as a shield. Legends as whispers and as echoes. What lies beneath could be nothing more than rock and frozen water, or it could be something that changes how we see ourselves in history. For now, it's enough to wonder. And tonight, wondering is exactly what we'll do. Antarctica has always been more than just a landmass at the bottom of the globe. Even before people knew it existed, it was already alive in human thought as an idea, a blank canvas where mystery could take root. Today, we can look at maps and satellites that give us some sense of what it looks like. But that doesn't erase the aura it carries, because even with technology, Antarctica is not a place we experience the way we experience other continents. Most of us will never see it in person, and even those who do only see the edge of what it is, 99% of the continent is covered in ice that is sometimes more than 2 meters thick. The rest is buried beneath temperatures that make it nearly impossible for life as we know it to thrive. This makes Antarctica unique, not just as geography, but as a story we tell ourselves. Think about it. When you imagine Europe or Asia, you see landmarks, cities, people. When you think of Africa, you think of landscapes, animals, histories that stretch back to the roots of humanity. When you picture the Americas, you imagine mountains, rainforests, deserts, or skyscrapers. Antarctica is different. It doesn't immediately conjure up people or cultures. It conjures up emptiness, cold silence. And in that silence, imagination gets louder. We start filling in the gaps with whatever we think might belong there, because our minds don't like leaving spaces blank. That is part of why Antarctica captures people so strongly. It's not just a frozen continent, it's a mirror for our questions. We ask, what if there's more to it? What if something waits under the ice? What if this blank space on the map hides a forgotten chapter of the world's story? And because the ice is so hard to penetrate, those questions don't get easy answers. That only makes the mystery grow. Antarctica wasn't even confirmed until 1820, when explorers finally saw it with their own eyes. Before that, maps had drawn an imagined southern continent called Terra Australis, the Great Southern Land, because ancient philosophers believed the world needed balance. They thought if there was land in the north, there must also be land in the south to keep the earth steady. For centuries, mapmakers shaded in a giant, unknown continent at the bottom of their charts, sometimes stretching almost all the way to the equator. It wasn't until the sailors actually ventured into those cold waters that the truth emerged. What they found wasn't a green and fertile land balancing the world, but ice, wind, and danger. That shift from imagination to reality should have ended the story, but it didn't. It just changed the shape of the mystery, because instead of saying Antarctica is a paradise, people began saying Antarctica must be hiding one. That's the curious thing about mystery. When one idea is disproved, another often rises in its place. The fact that no one lives there permanently, that it's so hard to explore, and that almost nothing grows there, makes it feel more like an alien planet than part of Earth. If Mars or the Moon are places we wonder about in space, Antarctica is the place we wonder about here at home. The silence plays a role too. If you've ever been in a snowy landscape, you know that snow and ice swallow sound. Antarctica magnifies that effect on a continental scale. Imagine thousands of miles where the loudest thing is the wind, where there are no bustling cities, no voices, no traffic, just stillness. That kind of silence is rare on Earth today, and it's unsettling. We're not used to places where humanity hasn't left a clear mark. So, when we think about Antarctica, we sense that silence and treat it as if it's holding something back, as though it knows something we don't. There's also the way Antarctica pushes against our limits. Humans don't survive there without massive preparation. The cold is extreme. Temperatures can drop below -100 degrees Fahrenheit. The winds can strip warmth in minutes. Even modern equipment struggles to withstand it. It's not a place we casually visit, set up camp, and explore freely. The difficulty of reaching it, surviving in it, and studying it makes it one of the least understood places on the planet. And the less we know about something, the easier it is for our imaginations to take control. That's why stories about lost civilizations under the ice keep circulating. If there were anywhere on Earth where history could be hidden in plain sight, it would be here. Scientists talk about subglacial lakes, about entire mountain ranges sealed beneath glaciers, about fossils that suggest a warmer and greener past. But for every scientific explanation, there are people who ask if those same discoveries could point to human presence long ago. After all, if Antarctica once had forests, if it once had animals, why not people? And if people were there, could they have built something? And if they built something, could it still be down there, frozen in place, waiting for us to rediscover it? We don't ask those questions about many other continents. We dig in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East, and we find ancient cities, but no one wonders if they're hidden under miles of ice. Antarctica, though, is different. It invites the speculation because it provides the perfect hiding place. The sheer scale of the ice means anything underneath is protected, locked away like an enormous time capsule. Whether that capsule holds only geology or something more is what keeps people fascinated. The imagination isn't only fueled by speculation about civilizations, it's also sparked by the fact that Antarctica is still revealing scientific surprises. When radar imaging first showed the gambits of mountains under the ice, scientists were astonished. They're as large as the Alps, completely concealed. When research drilled into Lake Vosto, they found an entire ecosystem hidden beneath a sheet of ice that had been sealed off from the outside world for millions of years. Bacteria that had never been seen before, surviving without sunlight. These discoveries remind us that even when we think a place is fully understood, it can still shock us. And if microbes can live hidden for millions of years, maybe other things could endure too. That's how the imagination stretches from science into speculation. Antarctica also attracts people because of its scale. It's the fifth largest continent, nearly twice the size of Australia, and yet we know less about it than smaller islands in the Pacific. That imbalance feels wrong somehow, and our minds want to correct it by filling in the gaps. We assume that something so big, so significant, must carry some deeper importance. And because we don't see it filled with cities and nations like other continents, we imagine those absences instead as secrets. There's another reason Antarctica captures us: the human attraction to extremes. We're drawn to the highest peaks, the deepest trenches, the most dangerous deserts. Antarctica is the ultimate extreme, the coldest, driest, windiest place on Earth. A place where only the most specialized life survives. And in chasing extremes, we also chase the mysteries they might hold. It's no accident that expeditions to the South Pole in the early 20th century were global news, celebrated like space landings would be later. Antarctica stood as the final great unknown, the place where maps stopped. That feeling hasn't entirely gone away. Even though satellites orbit overhead, the fact remains that we still haven't scratched much beneath the surface. And in that unsolved space, our thoughts wander freely. Some people also link Antarctica with myths like Atlantis. If there was ever a great civilization lost to time, where better for it to be than under a continent of ice? It's a compelling idea, not because it's proven, but because it fits the narrative we like. A hidden world, a forgotten people, a mystery waiting to be revealed. That idea doesn't need hard evidence to survive. It just needs a place like Antarctica where evidence could be hidden. So when we talk about why Antarctica captures our imagination, it isn't just one thing. It's the silence, the inaccessibility, the unknown, the scientific discoveries that raise more questions than answers, the myths that refuse to fade, and the human desire to believe there's always more to find. Together, they make Antarctica feel less like a frozen desert and more like a locked vault. And until that vault is fully opened, the fascination will remain. This fascination has real effects too. It drives explorers to risk their lives. It motivates scientists to develop new technologies for drilling, scanning, and mapping. It inspires writers, filmmakers, and storytellers to set their plots on its icy surface. And it keeps people like us awake at night, listening, wondering, and drifting into questions about what it all might mean. Antarctica is quiet, but in its quiet, it speaks loudly to the human imagination. It says, there are still places you do not know, there are still stories you have not heard, and maybe, hidden deep under layers of ice and time, there are chapters of your own history waiting to come back into the light. When people think of libraries, they imagine buildings filled with books, shelves stacked with words that hold the knowledge of centuries. But on Earth, there exists another kind of library, one that doesn't look like paper and ink. It looks like layers of ice. Antarctica isn't just a frozen desert, it's also an archive, a storage system that has quietly been collecting information for millions of years without asking anyone's permission. Every snowfall that lands on the continent eventually compresses into ice, trapping tiny bubbles of air, particles of dust, bits of pollen, even traces of chemicals drifting in the atmosphere at the time. Those layers stack year after year, century after century, until you get a vertical timeline written in frozen water. Drill down, and you're not just looking at ice, you're looking at history. This is one of the things that makes Antarctica not only fascinating, but also incredibly valuable, because inside that ice are chapters of Earth's story that no human ever wrote down, but which were recorded anyway. Scientists call them ice cores, cylinders drilled deep into the ice sheet and carefully extracted. Some of these cores reach back more than 800,000 years. That means when a researcher studies the gas bubbles trapped in them, they're literally breathing in air from nearly 1 million years ago. Think about that for a moment. The same oxygen molecules, the same carbon dioxide that passed over ancient landscapes, volcanoes, forests, or perhaps even early human ancestors, are still there, locked in place, until someone drills them out. The reason this works so well in Antarctica is that the conditions are perfect for preservation. Cold prevents decay, ice seals things off from exposure, and the sheer size of the continent means there are uninterrupted stretches of accumulation, undisturbed by plants, animals, or cities. If you buried something in Antarctica's ice today, there's a good chance it could still be there intact thousands of years later. In that sense, Antarctica is one of the most effective filing systems nature has ever built, and that is why people sometimes compare it to a library. Though instead of books, it shelves entire epochs. When you think of it this way, the ice becomes more than just frozen water. It becomes memory. Every layer is a snapshot of a particular year, sometimes even a particular season. Dust from deserts thousands of miles away shows up. Soot from ancient fires drifts in. Tiny clues build up like footnotes in a massive story. Reading them isn't always simple. It takes careful measurement, delicate instruments, and years of interpretation. But once you learn how to read, the ice tells you things you couldn't know any other way. For example, ice cores show us how the Earth's climate has changed over long stretches of time. By measuring the ratio of different oxygen isotopes, scientists can reconstruct past temperatures with surprising accuracy. They can see periods of warmth and cold, ice ages, and interglacial stretches. They can track how carbon dioxide levels rose and fell, and how those changes match shifts in global climate. This is how we know that the Earth's atmosphere today has far higher concentrations of carbon dioxide than at any point in the last 800,000 years. It's not speculation, it's written in the ice. The frozen archive doesn't lie, but climate isn't the only story preserved there. Sometimes you find evidence of volcanic eruptions recorded as thin black layers of ash. Sometimes you see traces of solar activity encoded in the levels of certain isotopes that formed when cosmic rays hit the atmosphere. Even ancient bacteria can occasionally be revived. Organisms that have been asleep for millennia suddenly waking up when thawed. It's as though the ice has been keeping them in cold storage, waiting for someone curious enough to bring them back. This idea that ice can preserve so much for so long naturally sparks imaginations. If it can keep air bubbles and microbes safe for hundreds of thousands of years, what else might it hold? Could there be more complex remnants down there? Tools, artifacts, structures from people we haven't yet discovered? Officially, there's no evidence of that, but the potential makes it easy to wonder, because if the ice can store something as delicate as a pusimov grain or an air bubble, why couldn't it also protect something larger? And with most of the continent unexplored beneath its surface, that question remains open. Another thing about this icy archive is how fragile it is once exposed. When a core is pulled up, it has to be kept frozen all the way through transport, storage, and analysis. If it melts, the record is destroyed forever. That fragility is part of why Antarctica feels like a library in the truest sense. The information is valuable, but it requires care, patience, and respect to handle. You can't just storm in and grab what you want. You have to read it slowly, carefully, and with the awareness that some of it is irreplaceable. There's also something almost humbling about the timeline ice preserves. Humans tend to think in short spans. A decade feels long. A century feels distant. But Antarctica reminds us that Earth keeps track on much bigger scales. Layers record not just centuries, but hundreds of thousands of years. They remind us how short human history really is, compared to the planet's memory. Cities rise and fall in the blink of a geological eye. Empires collapse in less time than it takes to form a few meters of ice. Standing on Antarctica is like standing on the lid of a history book, so massive you can't read it all at once. You can only drill tiny holes and glimpse pieces. That's why some scientists say Antarctica is our best archive of Earth's true story. Without it, we would know far less about past climates, about how the planet responds to change, and about what patterns might repeat in the future. In that sense, Antarctica isn't just a place of mystery for storytellers, it's also a place of hard data, a resource that helps us make sense of where we're going. And yet, the same qualities that make it valuable scientifically also make it perfect for speculation. Because if you accept that Antarctica is a library of Earth's past, then it's not a huge leap to wonder whether part of that past might include humans much older than we currently imagine. The library metaphor also helps explain why people find the continent so captivating. Libraries are places of discovery. You walk in not always knowing what you'll find. Sometimes it's something you expected. Sometimes it's something completely surprising. Antarctica functions the same way. Every expedition brings back something new. A new core, a new fossil, a new anomaly. Even if none of it proves civilizations existed there, each find expands our understanding of the world. It makes the continent feel alive in its own way, constantly offering new knowledge if only you take the time to look. There are also stories of entire lakes locked under the ice for millions of years. Lake Vosto, for example, lies beneath more than 2 meters of ice. It hasn't seen the surface in at least 15 million years. Yet, it contains liquid water, warmed slightly by geothermal heat beneath the crust. That means it may also contain organisms that evolve completely separate from the rest of the cart. If that doesn't sound like something out of science fiction, nothing does. And if a lake can preserve an entire ecosystem hidden from view, then again, the question arises, what else might be preserved? Could there be traces of human presence in some forgotten corner, sealed in ice as neatly as microbes are sealed in bubbles? Even mainstream science acknowledges that Antarctica has not given up all its secrets. There are vast regions no one has drilled, valleys hidden deep beneath the glaciers, and mountain ranges that remain little more than outlines on radar scans. Each of these is like an unopened book sitting on a shelf, waiting for someone to finally read it. And just as old libraries sometimes reveal lost manuscripts, the ice may one day reveal something equally unexpected. The very act of preservation also ties Antarctica to human imagination about immortality. We know everything decays eventually, but ice slows that process to a crawl. Mummies, frozen bodies, even food can survive astonishingly long when locked in ice. There are stories of explorers who froze food caches and returned decades later to find them still edible. That ability to stop time, to hold things exactly as they were, is rare on Earth. It makes Antarctica feel almost magical, though the magic is really just physics. Still, when you think about time paused like that, it makes sense why people project myths of hidden civilizations onto the ice. After all, what better place to freeze a lost world in place? What makes the metaphor even stronger is that, like a library, Antarctica doesn't always give up its stories easily. Sometimes the layers are disturbed, sometimes they're hard to read, sometimes they contradict each other, and sometimes you need new technology to even begin deciphering what's there. Just as a historian might struggle with an ancient text, a glaciologist struggles with the frozen code of the ice. And sometimes, just like historians, they're surprised by what they find. It's worth remembering, too, that we've only just begun to explore this icy archive. The oldest cores so far go back less than 1 million years, but the ice sheet itself is older in places. That means there are still pages we haven't turned, volumes we haven't opened. Every time a new drilling project is announced, the hope is that we'll read farther back into Earth's memory, maybe uncovering not just climate history, but something entirely unexpected. The possibility itself is enough to keep curiosity alive. So, when we talk about Antarctica as a library, we're not speaking in vague metaphor. It is literally an archive storing air, dust, ash, microbes, and memories in frozen form. It preserves them with a precision that no human technology could match for so long. It's a reminder that Earth keeps records, even when people don't. And it invites us to imagine what other records not yet seen might still be hidden in those shelves of ice. And that perhaps more than anything else is why Antarctica never feels fully known. Because even when you've read a few pages, you know the vast majority of the book is still closed. The silence, the cold, the remoteness, all of it combines to create a perfect hiding place. Whether what's hidden is only natural history or something more is still uncertain. But as long as the ice keeps holding its secrets, the imagination will keep wandering through its frozen aisles, wondering what might be waiting on the next page. When we think about maps, we think about clarity, about trying to make sense of the world by putting it down on paper. Maps are supposed to be tools of order, a way to transform oceans, mountains, and continents into something you can fold up and carry in your hands. But some maps don't just record geography, they spark questions, especially when they seem to show more than they should. One of the most famous of these is a chart created in the early 16th century by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. At first glance, it looks like many maps of its time, with coastlines of South America, Africa, and bits of the Atlantic drawn in sweeping curves. But what makes this map remarkable is not just what it shows, but what people believe it might show. Features that some say hint at Antarctica, drawn centuries before anyone is supposed to have seen it. The story begins in 1513, when Piri Reis compiled his map using older sources, many of which no longer exist. He wasn't inventing new coastlines out of thin air. He was stitching together fragments from earlier navigators, explorers, and charts passed down through centuries. What made his work stand out was the detail. Portions of the South American coastline appear on his map with striking accuracy, especially given that Europeans had only recently begun exploring those waters. This alone was impressive, but it's the southern part of the map that has fueled centuries of speculation. Looking at the lower sections of his chart, some researchers and enthusiasts claim to see not just the tip of South America, but what looks like a landmass further south with a coastline resembling parts of Antarctica. If true, this would be extraordinary. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, more than 300 years after Piri Reis drew his map. And even then, it was only glimpsed through fog and ice, not charted in detail. So, how could a 16th century mapmaker have included it? The mainstream scholarly explanation is that the coastline on the map is actually a distorted extension of South America. Early mapmakers often stretched or compressed landmasses, especially when piecing together incomplete reports. Pictography at the time was as much art as science, and distortion was common. But for those who look more closely, the resemblance to Antarctica is difficult to ignore. The map seems to suggest not only the presence of the southern continent, but a coastline free of ice, something that, if accurate, would mean someone had seen it long before it froze over. That possibility leads to the question of sources. Piri himself wrote notes on his map, explaining that he had used around 20 different charts and documents to compile it, some from Portuguese explorers, some from Arab sailors, and even a few, he claimed, went back to the time of Alexander the Great. If that's true, then he was drawing not only on the age of exploration, but on knowledge much older. The implication is that ancient maps may have existed, preserving information from civilizations that charted the world long before modern history acknowledges such ability. Of course, skeptics push back strongly. They argue that the coastline is too vague, that it could easily be South America stretched or misdrawn, and that connecting it to Antarctica is wishful thinking. They point out that even if older maps existed, there's no evidence those maps were based on anything more than sailors' observations. But the allure of the mystery persists, because if there is even a chance that Antarctica appears on a 16th century map, it forces us to ask questions about what was known by whom and when. Adding to the intrigue is the details some claim to see in the supposed Antarctic coastline. A few researchers have suggested that the features on the Piri Reis map line up not with Antarctica as it is today, but as it would appear without its thick ice sheets. If that interpretation holds, it would mean someone charted Antarctica during a time when it was ice-free, which takes us back thousands, maybe tens of thousands of years. That timeline doesn't fit comfortably with mainstream archaeology. Humans capable of global exploration, mapping coastlines, and leaving behind detailed charts simply aren't thought to have existed that far back. And yet, the theory remains compelling enough to attract attention precisely because Antarctica is so difficult to disprove. This is where the imagination takes over. Some suggest that advanced ancient civilizations may have had seafaring knowledge we'd forgotten. Others point to Atlantis or to cultures erased by cataclysms at the end of the last ice age. If Antarctica really was warmer and more accessible in the distant past, could people have reached it, explored it, and charted its shores? And if they did, could their maps have been copied, handed down, and eventually used by Piri? It's speculation, but speculation rooted in the tantalizing possibility that our history might be older and more complex than we've been taught. Even among those who are cautious, the Piri Reis map remains a curiosity. It demonstrates that knowledge circulates in ways we don't always recognize. Sailors, traders, and explorers shared information across cultures, and sometimes that information carried fragments of truth older than the people who recorded it. Whether the map shows Antarctica or not, it's still a reminder that history is full of gaps and that what survives to us is often only a fraction of what once existed. The mystery has also been magnified by the way the map resurfaced. It wasn't widely known in its own time. In fact, it was rediscovered in 1929 in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, rolled up in a dusty pile of documents. When scholars examined it, they realized its significance, not just as a piece of Ottoman topography, but as a potential link to lost knowledge. Suddenly, a chart drawn 400 years earlier became a global topic of conversation, feeding into debates about human history, lost civilizations, and the possibility of ancient exploration. Part of why the Piri Reis map has endured in the public imagination is that it combines two powerful elements: mystery and evidence. Unlike pure myth, it's a real artifact. You can see it, study it, analyze the ink and parchment. It exists. That concreteness gives it weight, but what it represents remains uncertain. Does it prove ancient seafaring civilizations, or is it simply a product of distortion and creative guesswork? That tension between something real and something speculative is exactly what keeps people fascinated. It also connects back to the idea of Antarctica as a blank canvas. Because we can't easily go under the ice to check, any piece of evidence, however thin, takes on disproportionate importance. A single map becomes more than paper. It becomes a doorway to imagination. If the Piri Reis map shows Antarctica, then perhaps the continent isn't just a frozen wasteland, but a vault of forgotten history. If it doesn't, then at the very least, it shows us how eager we are to find hidden connections, to believe there are chapters of the human story still missing. And maybe that eagerness says something about us. We like mysteries because they give us room to think beyond what we know. We like the idea that the world is still larger than our textbooks, that there might be discoveries waiting just out of reach. The Piri race map feeds that longing perfectly. It hints at something extraordinary without ever confirming it. It invites us to imagine ancient sailors braving unknown seas, charting coasts that would later vanish under ice. It tempts us with the possibility that civilization is older, deeper, and stranger than the record shows. At the same time, it grounds that imagination in something tangible. This isn't just a myth of a lost city, it's an actual object sitting in a museum. That physicality makes it harder to dismiss. Even skeptics who argue against the Antarctic interpretation acknowledge that the map shows remarkable accuracy for its time, which itself is impressive. It reminds us that knowledge in the past was sometimes far ahead of what we expect. So whether the map truly shows Antarctica or not, it continues to act as a symbol of what might still be hidden, a symbol of how much we've lost, a symbol of the way fragments of information can survive across centuries, carrying hints of stories we no longer fully remember. And when you place that symbol next to the continent itself, sealed under ice, the effect is powerful. A mysterious artifact connected to a mysterious place. Together, they reinforce each other, drawing us deeper into speculation. That's why the Pyrrhus map is so often mentioned in the same breath as Antarctica, not because it proves anything definitively, but because it captures the essence of mystery, something real, something uncertain, something that forces us to think about what we don't know. And in that sense, it's not just about one map, it's about the way humans respond to gaps in knowledge. We fill them with possibilities, with dreams of lost worlds, with the idea that our ancestors may have been more capable than we realize. Whether that's true or not, the map keeps the question alive, and maybe that's enough, because as long as the question lingers, Antarctica remains more than just ice. It remains a story waiting to be told, a puzzle waiting to be solved, and a reminder that even in a world mapped by satellites, there are still mysteries hiding in plain sight, rolled up in forgotten archives, or buried under miles of frozen silence. Long before anyone had sailed into the freezing waters at the bottom of the world, there were already stories about a great land that lay far to the south. It's one of the curious habits of human imagination. When something is missing, when a blank space sits on the map, people begin to fill it. And they fill it not with nothingness, but with invention. That is how the idea of a white continent began, not as a discovery, but as a whisper in myth and folklore, carried across cultures and centuries until explorers eventually gave it a name. The Greeks were some of the first to speculate about such a place. Their philosophers believed the world needed balance. If there was land in the north, then symmetry demanded land in the south. They called it Terra Australis, the southern land. To them, it wasn't a question of whether it existed, but a matter of necessity. The Earth, they thought, couldn't be complete without it. And so, maps were drawn with a massive landmass stretching across the southern edge, not from exploration, but from expectation. It's fascinating to realize how much of geography, at least in its early forms, was shaped not by observation, but by philosophy. The idea of a great southern land was as much a belief system as it was a geographical theory. But that wasn't the only origin of such stories. In other traditions, you find tales of lands beyond the winds, places hidden at the ends of the earth. Polynesian navigators spoke of journeys southward into colder waters, though their myths tend to blur with stories of spirits and gods. South American legends sometimes mention frozen realms or distant lands covered in ice, though separating cultural memory from later interpretations is never easy. Across different cultures, there are echoes of an idea that something immense waited out there, unseen, silent, and possibly unreachable. Even in Europe, as the Middle Ages gave way to the Renaissance, the southern land persisted in thought and maps. It appeared as a vast blank region at the bottom of the world, sometimes decorated with drawings of strange animals or imagined mountains. These weren't reports from voyages, they were reflections of myth and speculation. Still, they mattered because they gave people a sense that the unknown wasn't empty, but full of possibility. Terra Australis became not just a geographical concept, but almost a character in human imagination, an unseen partner in the world's design. Later, when explorers began sailing farther and farther into the southern oceans, they carried those myths with them. Sometimes they thought they had glimpsed the fabled land, only to discover an island, or a mirage, of fog. Sometimes they brought back exaggerated accounts of icebergs and storms, which only added to the aura of mystery. Antarctica wasn't discovered in the formal sense until the 19th century, but in the centuries before, it already lived in stories, half believed and half invented. What makes this particularly interesting is that myths often outlast the facts that eventually replace them. Even after Antarctica was confirmed to be a continent of ice, the older stories didn't disappear. Instead, they shifted. Now, people began to wonder whether the myths of Terra Australis were not entirely wrong, but perhaps distorted memories of something that had once been true. If ancient cultures had spoken of southern lands, maybe they had known something we had forgotten, and that suggestion opens the door to speculation about ancient civilizations, about people who might have seen Antarctica before it froze. Some researchers and writers have drawn connections between the myths of Atlantis and the idea of a white continent. The legend of a lost civilization, drowned or destroyed, resonates strongly with the notion of a continent hidden under ice. Plato's Atlantis was supposed to lie beyond the Pillars of Hercules, somewhere in the Atlantic, but over time, people moved it around in their imaginations, attaching it to different parts of the world. Antarctica became one of those candidates. After all, what better hiding place for a lost civilization than under miles of ice? Whether that interpretation has any basis or not, the overlap between myth and geography is part of what keeps Antarctica so fascinating. There are also echoes of the white continent in more subtle places. For example, the Norse sagas speak of journeys into icy waters, of lands touched by glaciers and endless night. While these likely refer to Greenland or the Arctic, the imagery carries the same resonance, a frontier of ice marking the edge of the world. Humans have always projected mystery onto frozen landscapes. They feel like boundaries, thresholds between the known and the unknown, and Antarctica, as the largest of those icy frontiers, naturally absorbed all the weight of those projections. Folklore also has a way of weaving real experiences into mythical form. Sailors returning from southern voyages often described vast walls of ice, creatures they thought were monsters, and waters so hostile they seemed cursed. These stories entered oral traditions and written records, not always as factual reports, but as warnings or legends. The sea itself has always been a generator of myth, and the seas around Antarctica were no different. To cross them was to risk not just storms, but the sense of leaving the human world entirely. In many ways, these myths were not so much about Antarctica itself, as about what Antarctica represented: the unreachable, the unknowable, the place just beyond the edge. And in human storytelling, those kinds of places are always important. They serve as backdrops for our deepest questions. What lies beyond? Who came before us? What happens when we step outside the safety of what we know? Antarctica, whether or not anyone had truly seen it, became a canvas for those questions. Even today, echoes of those myths persist. We still speak of Antarctica with a kind of reverence, as though it is not just another continent, but a secret one. When scientists drill into the ice or discover hidden lakes, the news carries a sense of awe that goes beyond the facts. It feels like touching the forbidden, opening a door into a story that has been waiting. In that way, modern science is continuing the same process that myth once began, filling in the blank space with meaning. What's striking is how similar many of these myths are across cultures. The details differ, but the themes are consistent. A land far away, often cold, often hidden, sometimes fertile, sometimes barren, but always significant. That suggests something universal in the way humans imagine the unknown. Perhaps it's less about specific geography and more about psychology. We need to believe that there are hidden places, because hidden places give us a sense that the world still has mysteries left. And Antarctica, more than any other land, has kept that role intact. This also explains why people continue to tie folklore to the possibility of ancient civilizations. If myths carried faint memories of real events, then perhaps those echoes point to cultures we don't yet recognize. Maybe sailors did glimpse parts of Antarctica in warmer eras. Maybe oral traditions preserved fragments of those encounters, exaggerated into legend over generations. We can't prove it, but the idea is attractive, precisely because it's possible. The ice covers so much that we can't dismiss it entirely. There's another layer to this as well. Myths aren't always about the past. Sometimes they were about the present needs of a culture. When people told stories of Terra Australis, they weren't just describing geography, they were creating balance, a sense that the world was ordered. The land in the north had to be matched by land in the south. The myth filled an intellectual need. Later, when people began to imagine civilizations hidden under ice, they were filling another need. The desire to believe humanity has deeper roots that were connected to something older and grander than what we currently know. Antarctica, by its silence and mystery, provided the perfect screen for those projections, and so the legend of a white continent endures not just in old maps or philosophical supposition, but in the way we continue to speak about Antarctica even today. We describe it as if it's not entirely part of our world, as if it belongs to another category altogether. That tone is itself a kind of folklore, modern, but rooted in the same impulses as the older myths. We tell stories about hidden pyramids under the ice, about secret military bases, about lost archives of human history waiting to be thawed. These are not so different from the myths of Terra Australis. They are simply new layers added to the same tradition, and that tradition matters because when you follow it from the Greeks, to the Renaissance, to the modern speculation, you see a continuous thread. Antarctica as more than geography. Antarctica as symbol, as myth, as mystery. Whether or not it hides the remnants of ancient civilizations, it has already played a central role in human imagination. It has been a white continent in more ways than one. White because of the ice, but also white like a blank page, inviting stories to be written across it. That's why even in the age of satellites, we still talk about Antarctica in terms of secrets. The myths gave it that role long ago, and the reality of its inaccessibility keeps it alive today. In many ways, the folklore and the science are partners. One keeps us questioning, the other keeps us searching. Together, they ensure that the white continent never fully loses its echoes of legend, and as long as those echoes remain, we'll continue to wonder not only what Antarctica is, but what it might have been. The thought of lost civilizations is one of those ideas that never really leaves us. You can find it in ancient myths, in philosophy, in modern stories, and in speculative theories that circle around the edges of history. The idea is simple but powerful, that once, long ago, there were societies as advanced, maybe even more advanced than those we know from recorded history, and that these societies were destroyed, erased, or hidden. The reason it captures us is because it pushes against the limits of what we think we know. History, as written in books and taught in schools, is only a small fraction of human time. Modern humans have existed for at least 200,000 years, but we only have clear records of civilization stretching back around 10,000. That gap leaves a lot of room for imagination, and when people look at Antarctica, with its vast, untouched, and hidden landscape, it becomes one of the most natural places to project those dreams of lost civilizations. Part of this fascination comes from how fragile human memory really is. Civilizations rise and civilizations fall, and often they leave only fragments behind. Cities crumble, temples are buried, texts are lost, and over centuries, entire cultures can vanish from the visible record. The Mayans once built sprawling cities in Central America, but by the time Europeans arrived, many were already swallowed by jungle. Angkor in Cambodia was once the largest urban center in the world, but for centuries, it was forgotten, except by locals. Even in deserts where conditions preserve ruins, massive cities can vanish from history until rediscovered by archaeologists. If that can happen, in places where stone and soil are the main obstacles, what about Antarctica, where ice 2 miles thick covers everything? It isn't hard to imagine that if a civilization had once been there, the ice could have hidden it so completely that we'd never know, at least not until we found a way to look underneath. There's also the matter of timing. Antarctica wasn't always the frozen wasteland we see today. Fossil evidence shows that it was once warm, covered in forests filled with rivers and lakes. Dinosaurs roamed there millions of years ago, and later, long after they were gone, the land still supported plants and animals. Even as recently as a few million years ago, parts of Antarctica were far less icy than they are now. The question that lingers is whether humans or human ancestors could have been there during one of those warmer periods. If they were, did they leave behind traces of culture, tools, or even cities? The scientific consensus says this is unlikely, since modern humans had not yet spread so far at that time. But the lack of certainty opens the door to speculation. And speculation thrives when there is mystery. Some people point to myths from around the world as potential echoes of lost civilizations. Atlantis is the most famous, a story told by Plato about an advanced society destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophe. Scholars generally treat it as allegory, a story about pride and downfall rather than a real place. But for thousands of years, people have wondered whether it was based on memory of something real. If so, where was it? And one of the places proposed has been Antarctica. The theory goes that if a civilization existed there when the continent was warmer, a sudden shift into ice could have destroyed it, burying its remains beneath glaciers. It's a dramatic idea, and it resonates with the way humans think about catastrophe and loss. Another element of why we dream of civilizations beneath the snow is that Antarctica feels uniquely suited to hide them. Unlike deserts, jungles, or mountains, where ruins eventually peek through, Antarctica keeps everything sealed under layers of ice. It's almost as if it was designed to store secrets. When radar scans reveal mountains, valleys, or lakes hidden below, people can't help but imagine what else might be down there. Scientists interpret those features as natural formations, but the human mind often prefers the extraordinary. A ridge becomes a wall, a flat expanse becomes the roof of a buried structure. The imagination takes the raw data and fills it in with stories. Psychology plays a role too. Humans like to think of themselves as part of a grander story. The idea that we are the first and only advanced civilization can feel lonely. Believing in lost civilizations connects us to something larger, something older, something that suggests humanity has deeper roots than we realize. It gives us a sense of continuity, a feeling that we are heirs to a legacy stretching back farther than history books allow. Antarctica, by its nature, is the perfect vessel for that dream. It's vast, it's hidden, and it's silent. It doesn't confirm or deny, it just waits. And in that waiting, we imagine. We also dream of civilizations under the snow, because we know how little of Earth we'll create. Tepus we races. The ocean floor, for example, is still mostly unexplored. We discover new species in jungles and caves regularly. Archaeologists are still finding entire cities with leader technology in forests that were thought to be empty. If all of that can happen in accessible places, how much more could be waiting in a land we can barely reach? Antarctica is the ultimate reminder that we don't crack everything, and that unknown invites us to fill the gaps with stories of lost cultures. There's also a cultural element. Lost civilizations have always been popular in storytelling because they reflect our own anxieties and hopes. They warn us that even great societies can collapse. But they also inspire us by suggesting that human potential has been vast for a very long time. Think about how many books, films, and theories revolve around the idea of rediscovering an ancient people with advanced knowledge. The theme resonates because it speaks to something deep in us, the desire for continuity, for connection across time. Antarctica, with its veil of ice, becomes one of the most dramatic stages for this theme. If such a civilization existed anywhere, hiding beneath a mile of frozen history, it would be here. Another reason Antarctica fuels these dreams is the simple fact that evidence is so hard to come by. Unlike other theories of lost civilizations, where ruins or artifacts can be found and debated, Antarctica keeps everything inaccessible. That means the debate never really ends. There's always just enough room for hope, for possibility, for the imagination to stretch further than the facts. In a strange way, the lack of evidence is what makes the idea so enduring. Because as long as the ice is there, the answer can't be confirmed or denied. It's worth noting, too, that the human fascination with hidden worlds isn't new. We've always told stories about secret lands, underground cities, or places concealed by nature. Antarctica simply provides the most dramatic real-world setting for those stories. It's not a mythical place, it's a real continent we can point to on a globe. And yet, it functions in the imagination almost like a fantasy realm. That overlap between reality and possibility is exactly what makes it so compelling. Even science, though careful and methodical, sometimes fuels these ideas unintentionally. When reports come out about unusual magnetic anomalies under the ice, or radar images reveal strange patterns, people leap to conclusions. Scientists might explain them as geological features, but to the public, they can look like something built, something intentional. And once that seed is planted, it grows quickly. People want to believe in hidden civilizations because it transforms the cold silence of Antarctica into a story, one in which we are connected to a forgotten past. And that's another important point. Dreaming of civilizations under the snow is not just about the past, it's also about the present. It reflects our own feelings about fragility, about how easily everything we've built could vanish. We know that ice ages come and go, that climates shift, that disasters strike. If entire civilizations once disappeared, then perhaps ours could too. Antarctica becomes a mirror, showing us both the possibility of greatness and the inevitability of loss. It tells us that nothing is permanent, but also that nothing is ever completely erased. Even under miles of ice, memory might survive. So why do we dream of civilizations beneath Antarctica? Because it satisfies so many layers of human curiosity. It connects us to myths like Atlantis. It resonates with the fragility of memory. It speaks to our desire for connection across deep time. It reminds us that the Earth still has places we cannot fully know. And it offers the possibility, however slim, that one day we might uncover evidence that changes our understanding of ourselves. Until then, the snow keeps its silence. The ice remains unbroken over most of the continent, and we continue to imagine, to tell stories, to dream about what might be waiting beneath that frozen vault. When we think about Antarctica, it's easy to imagine it as a simple frozen desert, just endless white stretching in every direction. But what lies under that ice is anything but simple. The ice sheets covering Antarctica are more than just frozen water. They're a heavy blanket that hides mountains, valleys, rivers, and lakes. A hidden landscape as complex and varied as any other continent on Earth. The difference is that here, nearly everything is sealed away, unseen, and almost unreachable. And this is where science and speculation meet. Because every time new data is revealed from beneath the ice, it raises questions not only about geology and climate, but also about what else could be there. Scientists began to truly uncover Antarctica's hidden world in the mid-10th century, when radar technology made it possible to peer beneath the surface. What they found was astonishing. Entire mountain ranges, like the Gambut's subglacial mountains, stretching hundreds of miles and rising as high as the Alps, buried completely under ice. Vast valleys carved by rivers long ago, still preserved, even though no one has seen flowing water there in millions of years. Lakes like Lake Vosto, Lake Willans, and Lake Mercer, sealed away under thousands of feet of ice, isolated from the surface for millions of years, containing ecosystems that have evolved in total darkness. These discoveries showed that Antarctica isn't just flat ice. It's a continent with landscapes as dramatic as any on Earth, simply hidden beneath a frozen shell. From a scientific perspective, this is fascinating because it allows us to study ancient climates, geology, and life in ways no other place can. But from a speculative perspective, it's equally irresistible. If mountains, valleys, and lakes can be hidden beneath the ice for millions of years, why couldn't other things be hidden there too? The sheer depth of the ice, up to 2 meters thick in places, means that if anything were built or left behind in a warmer age, it could still be preserved. The ice acts as both shield and barrier, protecting and concealing whatever lies below. One of the most striking discoveries has been the realization that Antarctica has an entire network of rivers beneath its ice. Meltwater from pressure and geothermal heat flows through channels, connecting lakes and carving unseen pathways. It's a hidden plumbing system, an underground world of water sealed in darkness. This alone raises countless scientific questions, but for those who speculate, it also raises imaginative ones. Could these rivers once have been open and accessible to humans or other civilizations during a warmer era? Could valleys now buried have once been fertile ground for life? The possibilities invite speculation precisely because so little is known. Magnetic anomalies under the ice add another layer to the mystery. In some regions, instruments have detected unusual readings, as though something massive and dense lies buried deep beneath the glaciers. Scientists explain these anomalies as variations in geology, perhaps from meteorite impacts, unusual rock formations, or changes in the Earth's crust. But to the imagination, they look like something else entirely. The idea that these anomalies could be the remnants of ancient structures, pyramids, or even entire cities has taken hold in popular culture, fueled by the fact that we can't easily go down and check. Until the ice is penetrated in those locations, the mystery remains unresolved. Science itself acknowledges that Antarctica could still surprise us. Every expedition seems to reveal something unexpected. When Lake Fosto was drilled, scientists found bacteria that had survived millions of years without sunlight, living in an isolated ecosystem. That alone was enough to spark conversations about how life can exist in extreme environments. If microbes can thrive, sealed under ice for millions of years, what else could endure in hidden pockets of Antarctica? The discovery of the living organisms beneath the ice shows that the continent is not as lifeless as it seems, and where there is life, speculation about more complex forms naturally follows. Satellite imagery has also contributed to the blending of science and speculation. Sometimes strange shapes are spotted, geometric lines, symmetrical formations that fuel theories about buried structures. Most of the time these turn out to be natural features, products of ice movement, rock formations or shadows. But the human brain is wired to recognize patterns, especially ones that look artificial. So when people see a triangular formation on a satellite image, the leap to imagining pyramids under the ice is almost automatic. Even when scientists explain the natural origins, the lure of the possibility remains. There are also stories, some exaggerated and some based on kernels of truth, about areas of Antarctica that are restricted or off-limits, while in reality, most restrictions are due to environmental protection or logistical safety. The secrecy fuels speculation. People wonder whether these restrictions are really about preserving the fragile ecosystem or about keeping hidden discoveries out of public view. The idea that something extraordinary has been found under the ice, something being kept secret, has become a recurring theme in conspiracy theories. And while the scientific community does not support such claims, the very fact that Antarctica is so remote and inaccessible makes it difficult to fully disprove them in the eyes of those who want to believe. Even mainstream science sometimes blurs into territory that sounds almost speculative. For example, research into past climates suggests that Antarctica was once a lush, green continent with forests, rivers, and a climate that could have supported complex life. Fossils of plants and even dinosaurs have been discovered, confirming this picture. When people hear that Antarctica was once habitable, the imagination leaps again. If it was green and warm, could humans or pre-human civilizations have lived there? Science says the timelines don't match, but the possibility lingers because human history is so much shorter than Earth's. The overlap between habitable Antarctica and the existence of humans may not align neatly, but in the vast sweep of geological time, the gap doesn't feel insurmountable to the imagination. This tension between science and speculation isn't necessarily a conflict. In some ways, they feed each other. Science reveals new data, mountains under ice, hidden rivers, fossils of green forests. Speculation takes that data and stretches it into stories, asking what if. Even when those stories go beyond what evidence supports, they serve a purpose. They remind us that discovery is not just about facts, but about wonder. Antarctica is one of the few places left on Earth where wonder can still thrive, precisely because so much is still unknown. And perhaps that is the heart of why speculation is so strong here. Most of the world feels mapped, measured, and explained. We can look up satellite images of almost any city or forest. We can travel nearly anywhere with relative ease. But Antarctica resists that. It keeps its secrets under ice, thicker than skyscrapers at all. It remains difficult to reach, dangerous to explore, and largely untouched by human hands. That resistance preserves its mystery, and into that mystery pours all the human need for stories of what lies beyond the known. So what lies under the ice sheets? Science says mountains, rivers, lakes, fossils, microbes, and records of climate stretching back millions of years. Speculation says perhaps more, maybe ruins, maybe civilizations, maybe memories of human history far older than we thought. Between those two perspectives is the truth, still waiting to be revealed. The ice holds the answers, and until we find a way to read them fully, science and speculation will continue to walk side by side, each pushing the other forward, each feeding the sense that Antarctica is not just a continent, but a vault of secrets. And in the meantime, we continue to wonder. We imagine what it would feel like to walk into a cavern beneath the ice, to see walls carved by hands thousands of years ago, to realize that our story is longer and stranger than we believed. Maybe that's only a dream. Maybe the reality is simply rock and water and microbes. But even if that's all it is, the wonder remains. Because in the act of asking what lies beneath, we remind ourselves that the world is still full of questions, and that some of those questions rest under Antarctica's frozen veil, waiting patiently for the day they can be answered. One of the strangest and most fascinating features of Antarctica isn't visible on the surface at all. It's not the towering glaciers, the endless snowfields, or the jagged mountains poking through the ice. It's the hidden lakes, buried far beneath the frozen crust, sealed away from the outside world for millions of years. These bodies of water are like secret worlds, kept in complete darkness under miles of pressure. They hold not only scientific importance, but also a kind of mysterious allure, because they force us to ask what could possibly survive in such isolated places, and what stories they might tell about both Earth's past and the possibilities for life elsewhere in the universe. The most famous of these lakes is Lake Vostok. It lies beneath more than 2 meters of solid ice, making it one of the most isolated environments on Earth. Discovered in the 1990s through radar imaging, it stunned scientists by its sheer size. Lake Vostok is as large as one of North America's Great Lakes, stretching more than 150 meters in length and 30 meters wide, with depths reaching nearly 3,000 feet. That makes it one of the biggest lakes on the planet. Yet, no one had ever seen it directly because of the thick shield of ice above it. The realization that such a massive body of water could exist, completely hidden, reshaped our understanding of Antarctica's interior. What makes Lake Vostok and others like it so fascinating is how long they've been cut off from the rest of the world. For at least 15 million years, maybe longer, the lake has been sealed beneath the ice, untouched by sunlight, wind, or weather. Imagine that, an ecosystem locked away for a span of time far longer than the entire history of human civilization. In those dark, pressurized waters, life has had to adapt to conditions we can hardly imagine. When scientists finally drilled into Lake Vostok, they found traces of microbial life, bacteria that had survived in that isolation, clinging to chemical energy sources instead of sunlight. These tiny organisms might not look like much, but their existence proves something extraordinary. Life can endure in places that seem completely inhospitable, and Lake Vostok isn't alone. More than 400 subglacial lakes have been identified across Antarctica, connected by hidden rivers and channels. Some are small, others are vast, some are caves, but together they form a secret watery landscape beneath the ice sheet. Each one is an isolated laboratory, a time capsule that may contain unique forms of life and preserved records of ancient climates. For scientists, drilling into these lakes isn't just about curiosity, it's about understanding how ecosystems survive in extreme environments, about reconstructing Earth's past, and even about searching for analogies to other worlds. Because if life can thrive in Lake Vostok, it suggests that life could also exist in similar, icy oceans elsewhere in the solar system, on moons like Europa or Enceladus, where water lies beneath ice crusts in the same way. The search for life in Antarctica's hidden lakes is slow and difficult. Drilling 2 miles through solid ice without contaminating the water below is a massive, technical challenge. Researchers use special clean drilling methods to avoid introducing surface microbes that would corrupt the results. When samples are finally retrieved, they are studied with intense care. The stakes are high, because what's discovered in these lakes could rewrite our understanding of biology. Already unusual forms of bacteria and other microscopic life have been reported. Organisms adapted to total darkness, high pressure, and mineral-rich environments. These aren't the kinds of ecosystems we're used to, powered by sunlight and photosynthesis. They are powered by chemistry, by reactions between water, rock, and heat from the earth below. Speculation naturally takes over. When you think about this, if microbes can live for millions of years beneath the ice, why not something more complex? Could small animals adapted to the dark exist down there too? Science has yet to find such evidence, but the possibility lingers, especially when you consider how often Earth surprises us with life in extreme environments. We found creatures at the bottom of the ocean, near hydrothermal vents, where conditions were once thought impossible for survival. We found organisms living inside rocks, in boiling hot springs, in acidic lakes. Everywhere we think life can't exist, life proves us wrong. So when we look at Lake Vostok and other hidden waters, it's natural to wonder whether something more than microbes is waiting. Some researchers even speculate that these lakes might preserve ancient DNA or evidence of past ecosystems, frozen snapshots of Earth's biological history. If plant material, animal remains, or even microbial communities from a warmer Antarctica made their way into these waters before the ice closed over, they might still be there, preserved in the dark. That's an idea with profound implications, because it could give us direct evidence of what Antarctica looked like before it froze. It could help us understand how climate shifted, how ecosystems responded, and maybe even whether humans or pre-human species ever encountered the continent in earlier eras. For those who lean towards speculation about lost civilizations, the hidden lakes are irresistible. If nature can preserve microbes for millions of years, then perhaps it could also preserve artifacts, tools, or even structures, if they ever existed. The idea may stretch the evidence, but it captures the imagination precisely because the lakes are so inaccessible. No one can say with certainty what's at the bottom of Lake Vosto, because no one has been there. That silence creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum pour the most extraordinary possibilities. Lake Vosto also inspires comparisons to myths and legends. Some imagine it as a kind of underworld, a hidden realm beneath the surface, echoing stories of subterranean worlds in human folklore. Others connect it to the idea of Atlantis, not as a city above water, but as something buried in an eternal ocean beneath the ice. Whether those interpretations are fanciful or not, they show how deeply these hidden waters stir the human imagination. It's not just science at work here. It's the timeless human urge to see mystery in what we cannot reach. Other lakes add to the intrigue. Lake Willens, for example, lies beneath less ice than Vosto, and was the first subglacial lake directly sampled in 2013. When researchers finally reached it, they found living microbes thriving in its cold, dark waters. This confirmed that life is not only possible, but present under the Antarctic ice. That discovery made the speculation around larger lakes like Vosto even stronger. If a smaller, shallower lake can support life, what might a massive one like Vosto contain? Then there's Lake Mercer, another subglacial body sampled in 2019, where scientists found not only microbes, but also tiny remnants of ancient plants and animals, evidence that the lake may have been connected to the ocean in the past. These findings show that Antarctica's hidden waters are not isolated curiosities, but dynamic environments connected in ways we're only beginning to understand. The scale of these discoveries also highlights how little we truly know about what lies beneath the ice. Hundreds of lakes, thousands of channels, ecosystems sealed off unimaginable spans of time. We're only scratching the surface, and each new find raises more questions than it answers. Science proceeds cautiously, emphasizing the need for clean drilling, careful sampling, and patient analysis. But the imagination is less cautious. It leaps to what-ifs, to possibilities that science hasn't yet confirmed or denied. That balance between restraint and curiosity is part of what makes this subject so compelling. Even beyond life, the lakes may contain secrets about Earth's climate. Sediments at the bottom could preserve records of past atmospheres, ocean currents, and ecosystems. Unlocking those records could help us understand not only the history of Antarctica, but also the future of our own climate. Ice cores already show us 800,000 years of atmospheric history. Sediments in subglacial lakes might go back even further, offering a glimpse into epochs we've barely begun to understand. That's another reason these hidden waters are seen as so important. They may hold the missing pages of the Earth's environmental story. For storytellers and those fascinated by mystery, the lakes beneath Antarctica serve a different role. They are metaphors for the unknown, symbols of how much is hidden beneath the surface of the world and of ourselves. They remind us that even when we think we know our planet, there are still vast unseen realms waiting quietly. They challenge our assumptions about what is possible, and they keep alive the sense of wonder that drives both science and imagination. In the end, Lake Vosto and the hundreds of other hidden waters beneath Antarctica are more than geological curiosities. They are living laboratories, frozen vaults of history, and canvases for human speculation. They force us to accept that our planet is still full of mysteries, that beneath the thickest ice on Earth lies a world we are only beginning to glimpse. And as long as those lakes remain sealed, they will continue to inspire both careful science and boundless imagination. Because in places like these, science and speculation are not opposites. They are partners, each pushing us to ask what might be waiting beneath the ice, and each reminding us that some of the greatest discoveries are still hidden, patiently waiting in the dark. When people imagine Antarctica, the picture that usually comes to mind is endless flat ice, a featureless expanse stretching toward the horizon. But that image is misleading. Beneath the ice lies a landscape of staggering complexity, and some of its most surprising features are mountains. Vast ranges that rise as high as the Alps, buried so deep under the frozen crust that they remained completely unknown until radar technology revealed them. These hidden peaks are sometimes called ghost mountains because they are both real and invisible, shaping the continent yet hidden from the human eye. They add another layer of mystery to Antarctica, one that ties together scientific discovery, deep geological time, and speculation about what might have once existed in a very different world. The most famous of these ranges is the Gambit Mountains, discovered in the late 1950s during a Soviet expedition. Using seismic instruments, scientists detected the echoes of peaks and valleys beneath the ice, a range stretching more than 700 miles, with summits rising over 10,000 feet. To put that into perspective, this is a mountain system as large as the European Alps, completely buried under nearly 2 miles of ice. No one had ever seen it. No one had climbed its peaks, and yet it was there all along, a massive feature hidden from view. The shock of that discovery was enormous. Until then, the idea that entire mountain ranges could be concealed beneath ice seemed almost unthinkable. What makes the Gamb Mountains even more puzzling is their apparent youth in geological terms. Evidence suggests that they are not ancient eroded remnants, but relatively young in their structure, as though they were rejuvenated by geological processes long after they first formed. Their origins remain uncertain, with theories ranging from ancient rifting to more recent uplift events. Whatever the explanation, the very existence of such a massive range beneath Antarctica adds weight to the idea that this continent holds secrets not yet fully understood. And the Gambit Range is not the only one. Other subglacial mountains stretch across the continent, revealed by radar and satellite imaging. Some are rugged, some smooth. Some cut through by valleys that suggest rivers once flowed among them. When you realize that these landscapes existed before the ice entombed them, it becomes clear that Antarctica was once a very different place. There were mountains, rivers, plains, and coastlines, all shaped by climates far warmer than today's. These were not alien environments. They were places where life could thrive. The thought of such ghost ranges naturally leads to speculation. If mountain systems as large as the Alps could exist unseen for millions of years, what else might be hidden there? Valleys that once supported forests, caves that could have preserved plant and animal remains, or perhaps, as some suggest, even traces of ancient human activity, if people had ever reached the continent during one of its warmer eras. While mainstream science does not support the idea of humans in Antarctica's distant past, the simple fact that entire mountain ranges remained unknown until recently keeps the door open in the imagination. If we can miss something that big, what smaller details might still be waiting? These buried mountains also tell us about Antarctica's climate history. To be covered by ice, they must once have been free of it, towering over landscapes that may have looked much like modern mountain ranges elsewhere on Earth. Fossil evidence found in other parts of the continent supports this picture. Leaves from ancient forests, pollen grains, and traces of dinosaurs all point to a time when Antarctica was green, warm, and alive. It's not hard to imagine rivers flowing through valleys, glaciers retreating to reveal fertile ground, and ecosystems spreading across the land. The ghost ranges remind us that Antarctica has not always been what it is today. It has shifted through climates and epochs, cycling between warmth and ice. The presence of these hidden ranges also deepens the mystery of Antarctica's isolation. Mountains usually influence climate, weather patterns, and ecosystems. If Antarctica's mountains were exposed today, they would shape winds and storms, create rain shadows, and provide habitats for life. But buried under ice, they are silenced. Their valleys are filled, their peaks smothered, their influence cut off. It's as if an entire world was locked away, leaving us only the frozen shell above. This is part of why they are called ghost ranges. They are there, but they no longer act, no longer breathe, no longer shape the world around them in the ways mountains usually do. From a scientific perspective, these ranges are crucial for understanding how the ice sheet formed and stabilized. The Gamber TV Mountains, for example, are thought to have provided a surface on which the East Lamy Antarctic ice sheet first grew around 34 million years ago. In that sense, the mountains played a role in shaping the frozen continent we see today. Without them, Antarctica might have developed differently. They're part of the foundation of the ice, literally and figuratively, and that makes them vital to any effort to reconstruct Earth's climatic history. But again, where science provides explanation, speculation adds story. Some researchers outside the mainstream have suggested that the radar images of Antarctica's subglacial mountains show shapes too regular to be natural, that they resemble pyramids or structures built by intelligent hands. These claims are not supported by evidence, but they continue to circulate because the imagery is often vague, open to interpretation. Human brains are wired to recognize patterns, especially geometric ones, and when faced with the grainy outlines of radar scans, it's easy to see what you want to see. Whether those interpretations are correct or not, they demonstrate how Antarctica fuels the imagination, taking even the most technical data and turning it into stories of lost worlds. The ghost ranges also invite comparisons to myths of hidden lands. In some versions of the Atlantis story, the lost civilization was buried, drowned, or frozen. The image of mountains swallowed by ice resonates with those tales. It's easy to imagine entire societies erased by climate shifts, their cities reduced to ruins hidden in valleys that no one can reach. While evidence for this remains absent, the symbolism is powerful. The ghost ranges become metaphors for memory itself, massive, enduring, but covered over by the passage of time until only traces remain. Practical exploration of these ranges is still in its infancy. Drilling through miles of ice to reach bedrock is one of the hardest tasks imaginable. Most of what we know comes from radar, seismic surveys, and satellite data. That leaves much unknown. What kinds of rocks make up the ranges? What fossils might be buried in their valleys? What sediments might reveal about ancient rivers or seas? Each question remains unanswered, and each unanswered question invites both careful, scientific research and free-ranging speculation. The mountains also connect Antarctica to the rest of Earth's geological story. They show that this frozen land is not separate or alien, but part of the same processes that shape all continents. Plate tectonics lifted these ranges, rivers carved their valleys, glaciers sculpted their slopes, just as elsewhere. The only difference is that here, ice locked it all away. In that sense, Antarctica is less a strange outlier and more a mirror held up to the rest of the world, showing us how landscapes can be transformed and hidden by time. For those who dream about lost civilizations, the ghost ranges provide one of the most tantalizing settings. Imagine a fertile Antarctica during a warm epoch with valleys carved by rivers and mountains rising above forests. Imagine people arriving, building settlements, perhaps even thriving for centuries. Then imagine the climate shifting, glaciers advancing, ice consuming everything. What would remain today? Probably nothing visible on the surface, but under the ice, in valleys now sealed off, perhaps something small could have endured. It's a story without evidence, but it fits so neatly into the idea of the ghost ranges that it continues to captivate people. At the same time, the reality of these ranges is enough on its own to inspire awe. Mountains as large as the Alps, completely hidden, existing in silence for millions of years. That fact alone reminds us of how incomplete our knowledge still is. How much of Earth remains undiscovered even in an age of satellites and global mapping? It's a humbling thought. If we can miss something so massive, what else might still be concealed in the deep? inaccessible corners of our planet. And so, the Ghost Ranges remain both scientific puzzles and symbols of possibility. They're real, mapped, and measured, yet they are also mysterious, open to interpretation, and connected to the larger human need to imagine. They show us that the Earth still has the power to surprise, that under the ice there are landscapes as grand as any on the surface, waiting patiently to be revealed. And until that day comes, they will continue to haunt our imagination, not with fear, but with the quiet reminder that some of the greatest wonders of our world are the ones we cannot see. When people look at Antarctica today, it is almost impossible to imagine it as anything but a frozen desert. The continent is covered by ice sheets that hold around 70% of the planet's fresh water, with average temperatures so low that no trees, no fields, and no permanent human settlements can survive. Yet, beneath that frozen surface lies evidence that tells a very different story. A story of coastlines washed by waves, of rivers feeding into the sea, of forests stretching toward the horizon. Antarctica was not always what it is now. There was a time when it was green, a time when its coasts were alive with plants and animals, and a time when it looked far less like an alien world and far more like the continents we know. The clues are scattered, but they are clear. Fossils of trees has been found embedded in rock, their growth ring showing that they once flourished in climates far warmer than today's. Pollen grains are preserved in sediment, microscopic proof that flowering plants once spread across the land. Fossils of amphibians and reptiles suggest that rivers and lakes once provided habitats for creatures that could never survive in the present conditions. There are even remains of dinosaurs discovered in places that today are buried under glaciers. All of this tells us that Antarctica was not always buried under miles of ice. It has been through transformations, shifting from lush landscapes to frozen emptiness across millions of years. Part of the reason for this transformation is continental drift. Antarctica wasn't always at the South Pole. Hundreds of millions of years ago, it was part of the supercontinent Gondwana, joined to South America, Africa, India, and Australia. In that configuration, it lay closer to the equator, and its climate was temperate. Forests grew, rivers flowed, and life thrived. Over time, as the tectonic plates shifted, Antarctica drifted southward, eventually settling into its polar position. But even after reaching its current location, it didn't freeze immediately. For millions of years, greenhouse conditions kept it relatively warm. Fossilized remains of subtropical plants, including palm trees, have been found in Antarctica, showing just how different the continent once was. As climates cooled, Antarctica began to change. The first ice sheets formed around 34 million years ago as global carbon dioxide levels dropped, and the Earth entered a colder phase. But the process was not straightforward. Ice expanded and retreated multiple times, sometimes leaving large portions of the continent ice-free. During those intervals, the coastlines of Antarctica would have looked much like the coasts of South America or New Zealand today, lush, green, and teeming with life. Sediments from ancient seashores show evidence of shells and marine organisms, suggesting that rich ecosystems thrived where now only ice meets the sea. These ancient coastlines capture the imagination because they remind us that Antarctica was once part of the living world in ways we can barely picture. Instead of endless white, think of cliffs overlooking open water, forests stretching inland, rivers carving valleys. Instead of penguins huddled against the cold, imagine flocks of birds, herds of grazing animals, and perhaps even early mammals exploring the land. The contrast with today could not be more stark. Yet, the evidence is there, embedded in the rocks and sediments that still survive beneath the ice. One of the most striking discoveries in recent years came from drilling projects that pulled up cores of sediment from beneath the seafloor near Antarctica. These cores contained not only microossils of plants, but also chemical signatures that indicated much warmer climates in the past. In some periods, The continent may have supported forests similar to modern temperate rainforests with average temperatures that never dropped below freezing. Imagine walking along a coastline in Antarctica during those times, hearing waves lap against the shore surrounded by greenery, with no hint of the glaciers that would one day dominate the soil land. The idea of a green Antarctica also ties into human speculation about lost civilizations. If the continent was once habitable, then it becomes at least conceivable that humans or human ancestors could have lived there. Mainstream science argues that this is unlikely, since the periods when Antarctica was warm occurred long before humans evolved. But the human imagination doesn't always follow those timelines. If coastlines once existed, if forests once grew, then it's tempting to imagine people building settlements there, leaving behind traces that were later buried by advancing ice. Even if such ideas stretch beyond the evidence, they capture attention because they connect the stark reality of Antarctica with the universal human story of adaptation and survival. These ancient coastlines also highlight how fragile climates can be. A land that was once green and full of life is now locked in ice, its rivers frozen, its forests turned to stone. The transformation reminds us that Earth is not static. It shifts and changes, sometimes gradually, sometimes dramatically, and the environments we take for granted today are not guaranteed to last. In this way, Antarctica is a mirror of change, showing us that even the most extreme landscapes have been different in the past and will likely be different again in the future. From a scientific perspective, studying these coastlines is essential for understanding climate change. The sediments and fossils they preserve tell us about carbon dioxide levels, ocean currents, and atmospheric conditions in past ages. They show how the Earth responded to warming and cooling cycles, and they provide clues about how our current climate crisis may unfold. Antarctica's green past is not just a curiosity, it's a warning and a lesson. If it could transform so completely, so too can other parts of the world. But for storytellers, and for those who dream of lost civilizations, the green Antarctica is more than science. It's a stage on which to imagine what could have been. If there were once coastlines where ships could dock, valleys where crops could grow, and rivers that could support settlements, then perhaps there was also a time when people walked there. Even if that is only imagination, it's a powerful one, because it suggests that history is not confined to what we already know. It hints at possibilities hidden beneath the ice, waiting to be rediscovered. The fossil record keeps adding fuel to this speculation. Leaves and wood from ancient forests have been found, so well preserved that their structure can still be studied. Fossils of animals that required warm climates prove beyond doubt that Antarctica was once fertile ground. Each new discovery adds another piece to the picture of a land utterly unlike the one we see today, and each piece makes it easier to believe that Antarctica's story is far from complete. Even the coastlines themselves are not gone forever. As ice melts due to modern climate change, some ancient shorelines are re-emerging, revealing rocks and sediments that have not seen the light of day in millions of years. These glimpses into the past are both thrilling and sobering. They show us what once was, but they also remind us of what may come again as global warming reshapes the planet. Antarctica may not become green again in our lifetimes, but the possibility exists in the long arc of geological time, and so the image of Antarctica as a green land with ancient coastlines is more than a curiosity of history. It's a reminder of how much the Earth can change, how much it has changed, and how much it will continue to change. It connects the present frozen wasteland with a past full of life, and it invites us to imagine a future where the continent could transform again. Whether we look at it scientifically or speculatively, the lesson is the same. Antarctica is not fixed. It is dynamic, shifting, alive in ways we're only beginning to grasp. The coastlines of the past may be buried under ice, but in our minds they remain vivid. Waves breaking on Antarctic shores, forests swaying in the wind, animals moving across open plains. This is not fantasy. This is what the evidence tells us once existed. And knowing that it did exist makes all the difference, because it turns Antarctica from a place of eternal ice into a place of eternal change. A continent with a story far deeper and stranger than its current surface suggests. When people picture Antarctica, they usually imagine a place almost completely empty of life, a frozen wilderness where only penguins, seals, and a few tough species of birds and microscopic organisms can survive. Yet beneath the surface, in the rocks scattered along the coasts and embedded deep under ice, there are fossils that tell an entirely different story. They show us that this continent, now dominated by ice and silence, was once alive with plants, in animals that seem completely out of place in the environment we see today. Each fossil is a kind of contradiction, proof that Antarctica once supported ecosystems we could never have guessed by looking at its present form. The story begins with plants. Fossilized leaves, pieces of wood, and even entire tree trunks have been found in Antarctica, often so well preserved that their structure is still visible. Growth rings in some of these trees show they experienced not only warm climates, but also the long, dim winters of polar latitudes. And this suggests that forests once thrived, even when Antarctica was positioned near its current location before the ice locked it away. Some fossils show evidence of broadleaf deciduous trees, the kinds you would expect to find in modern temperate forests. Others reveal species similar to southern beech and conifers, plants that would not survive in today's deep freeze. These discoveries are striking because they make Antarctica feel less like a barren anomaly and more like a place with a long, complex ecological history. Animals leave their mark as well. Fossils of amphibians and reptiles, including creatures like frogs and salamanders, have been uncovered, showing that rivers and lakes once supported freshwater ecosystems. In other cases, the remains of marine reptiles such as plesiosaurs have been found, indicating that the seas around Antarctica were once home to the same creatures that swam elsewhere. During the age of the dinosaurs, perhaps most dramatic are the dinosaur fossils themselves. Skeletons of species that once roamed Antarctica have been unearthed, including duck-billed dinosaurs and small carnivores. These animals lived in forests, hunted, and grazed on plants in an environment that today would be unimaginable. The idea of dinosaurs living in Antarctica seems impossible at first, but the fossils prove otherwise. During the Cretaceous period, much of the continent was ice-free, with climates mild enough to sustain vegetation and animal life. Even though the poles still experienced long periods of darkness, the climate overall was far warmer, and dinosaurs adapted to those unique conditions. Some scientists believe these polar dinosaurs may have developed special traits to survive, extended winters, perhaps slowed metabolisms or behavioral strategies we're only beginning to guess at. What we know for certain is that they lived there, thrived there, and left their remains behind in rocks that were later entombed by glaciers. Beyond the age of dinosaurs, fossils also show that Antarctica supported mammals. In the early Cenozoic era, after the dinosaurs were gone, fossil evidence suggests marsupials and other mammal groups spread across the continent when it was still connected to South America and Australia. These animals lived in forests that covered the land, their bones preserved in sediments that remain as hints of an era long forgotten. At times, Antarctica was not just habitable, but a thriving crossroads of species, a place where plants and animals mixed freely across Gondwana before continental drift separated them. The fossils also reveal more subtle details. Pollen, grains and spores, trapped in sediment, show the progression of climates, how forests gave way to tundra, and tundra to ice. These microscopic fossils are just as important as the larger bones and leaves, because they show transitions over time. They tell us that Antarctica didn't change suddenly, but moved through stages, shifting gradually until the ecosystems collapsed under advancing glaciers. By studying these tiny remains, scientists can reconstruct entire landscapes complete with plants, insects, and weather patterns. Some fossils even suggest ecosystems we would not normally expect in such a region. There are traces of freshwater mussels, fish, and other aquatic life, pointing to rivers and lakes that once dotted the continent. Imagine standing on Antarctica millions of years ago, not on ice, but by a riverbank shaded by trees, hearing frogs croak and fish splash in the water. The fossils make that picture real. They proved that Antarctica was once a place of sound and movement, not silence and wind. This abundance of life, preserved in Antarctica, is important scientifically, but it also fuels speculation. If plants and animals could thrive there, what else might have been possible? Could humans, or pre-human species, have reached the continent during one of its warmer phases? Could some memory of its forests have survived in ancient myths, later transformed into stories of southern lands and lost worlds? Science says humans are too recent to have overlapped with these climates. But imagination is less strict with timelines. When people hear of dinosaurs in Antarctica or forests at the South Pole, they naturally begin to wonder whether more recent undocumented life could have existed there too. Even within mainstream research, the fossils raise profound questions about climate change. They show the Earth's climate has shifted dramatically in the past, with Antarctica swinging from lush forests to frozen desert. They remind us that the climate system is not fixed but dynamic, influenced by greenhouse gases, continental positions, and ocean currents. The fossils serve as warnings. If Antarctica could once be green and alive, it could change again in the future. In fact, with modern global warming, some ice-free areas are already expanding, revealing ground that hasn't seen sunlight in millions of years. In those newly exposed rocks, scientists are finding more fossils, adding pieces to the puzzle of Antarctica's long-lost ecosystems. Some of the most remarkable finds have been tree stumps fossilized in place, still rooted in the soil where they once grew. These are not just fragments washed in from elsewhere. There are entire forests preserved in stone, evidence that Antarctica once supported thriving woodlands. The sight of fossilized tree rings, perfectly preserved in a land now devoid of trees, is one of the most powerful reminders of how drastically the world can transform. These stumps stand like monuments, proof of a time when the land we think of as dead ice was instead full of growth. Creatures out of place are perhaps the most haunting fossils. Penguins, much larger than modern species, once lived in Antarctica, some standing taller than humans. Fossils of giant birds suggest ecosystems that could sustain them. Marine life found in sediment shows that the oceans around Antarctica were once warm and rich, with diversity. Even now, fossils of whales and seals occasionally turn up, showing that these species have long histories in southern waters. Each discovery adds to the picture of a continent that has been through countless transformations, each one leaving behind fragments of memory preserved in stone and ice. Speculation builds on these fragments. If giant penguins once walked Antarctica's shores, if dinosaurs once roamed its forests, then why couldn't there have been civilizations during later warm periods? The fossil record doesn't confirm this, but it doesn't completely rule it out either, especially since so much of the continent remains unexplored beneath ice. The combination of fossils showing a green, vibrant Antarctica and the present-day inability to see beneath the ice makes the idea of hidden histories irresistible. The fossils are also important because they connect Antarctica to the rest of the world. They show that it wasn't always isolated, that it once shared species with South America, Africa, and Australia. The spread of plants and animals across Gondwana left imprints in all these continents, and Antarctica holds crucial pieces of that story. Without its fossils, we wouldn't fully understand the history of life on Earth. But with them, we can see how continents once joined, how climates shifted, and how ecosystems adapted to change. Ultimately, fossils in the frost are reminders that that Antarctica is not a place frozen in time, but a land that has lived many lives. It has been warm, it has been green, it has supported forests, animals, and entire ecosystems. The fossils make that undeniable, and they keep alive the idea that Antarctica is more than just the coldest, driest, most remote continent. It is also one of the richest archives of Earth's history, a place where the past is preserved in stone and ice, waiting for us to uncover it. And every fossil discovered, whether it's a tree stump, a pollen grain, or a dinosaur bone, adds to that archive. Each one whispers that Antarctica was once a land of life, a land completely different from the one we see today. And each one fuels the imagination to ask what else might still be hidden, waiting under the glaciers, out of sight, out of reach, but never fully gone. Whenever the idea of Antarctica and ancient history comes up, one of the most persistent questions is whether humans could ever have reached it before the modern age. On the surface, the answer seems obvious. Antarctica is remote, inhospitable, and covered by ice. Discovered only in the early 19th century. Yet, in spite of that official history, there has always been debate about whether humans might have visited much earlier, perhaps in times when the continent looked very different, or whether fragments of ancient knowledge about it survived through myths and maps. The possibility of human footprints in Antarctica, literal or metaphorical, is one of the most provocative parts of its mystery. The mainstream view is clear. Antarctica, as we know it now, has been locked in ice for millions of years. By the time modern humans evolved, it was already frozen, barren, and effectively unreachable with ancient technology. Early sailors could barely cross open oceans without being wrecked, let alone make it to the far south through some of the roughest seas on the planet. From this perspective, the idea of early visitors seems implausible, and yet the debate doesn't die because there are hints, stories, and anomalies that leave just enough room for speculation. One of the strongest pieces of fuel for this debate is seagraphy. Maps like the one drawn by Piri Reis in 1513, which some claim shows Antarctica before it was officially discovered, raise questions about whether earlier civilizations had knowledge of the continent. Even if we set aside Antarctica specifically, the fact that ancient and medieval maps sometimes contain surprisingly accurate geographical details suggests that knowledge could have been preserved from sources we no longer recognize. If explorers or sailors ever reached Antarctic waters in warmer periods, could fragments of their observations have been passed down, eventually influencing maps centuries later? This remains speculative, but it continues to fascinate people precisely because it's so difficult to prove or disprove. There are also ancient myths to consider. Stories of lands to the south, lands beyond the known world, appear in multiple cultures. The Greeks spoke of terra australis, the necessary land of the south, to balance the globe. Polynesian navigators told of long voyages across the Pacific, sometimes hinting at colder waters beyond their usual routes. South American legends occasionally mentioned frozen realms or lands hidden by snow. None of these prove direct knowledge of Antarctica, but they raise the possibility that early people imagined or even glimpsed far southern lands long before modern exploration confirmed them. Myths often exaggerate, but they also preserve memories. If humans had ever seen Antarctica's coast during a brief ice-free period, might echoes of that encounter survive in folklore? Another element that fuels the debate is how quickly human history has changed in recent discoveries. Time and again, archaeologists have found evidence that humans traveled farther and accomplished more than once thought possible. Sites in the Americas have pushed back timelines for when humans first arrived. Sophisticated artifacts appear in places where older theories said only primitive tools should exist. Ancient seafaring is now recognized as more advanced than once assumed, with people crossing oceans thousands of years earlier than textbooks used to claim. If those assumptions about the past can shift so dramatically, some argue, why not also entertain the possibility that humans might have reached Antarctica earlier than we think. There's also the question of climate. Fossils show that Antarctica was once warm and habitable, covered in forests and alive with animals. While these periods mostly predate human existence, there were still transitional times when parts of the continent may have been more accessible, with less ice, and more open coastlines. Could early humans or even pre-human species like Homo erectus have explored those coasts? If small bands of people could spread across Asia, Europe, and eventually into the Americas, could they also have ventured farther south than we give them credit for? The scientific consensus says no, but again, the evidence is incomplete. Most of Antarctica is buried under ice, and without excavation, we can't rule out every possibility. Some point to anomalies in the ice itself. Satellite images sometimes show shapes that appear geometric, sparking speculation about ruins buried beneath glaciers. While most of these shapes are explained as natural formations, the sheer size and remoteness of Antarctica mean that no one has thoroughly investigated them all. Magnetic anomalies detected in certain regions also contribute to the speculation. Scientists attribute these to geological variations, but others interpret them as potential evidence of structures or artifacts. If such things were ever confirmed, they would dramatically alter our understanding of history. Until then, they remain questions hanging in the frozen air. The debate also draws on stories of restricted access. Certain areas of Antarctica are off limits for environmental or logistical reasons, but some interpret this as evidence that secrets are being deliberately hidden. While there is no scientific support for these claims, the combination of mystery, restricted zones, and lack of direct evidence keeps the idea alive. If there were traces of human presence in Antarctica, skeptics argue, would we even be told? That suspicion fuels endless speculation. It's important to recognize that even without hard evidence, the allure of the idea is powerful. The thought that humans might have reached Antarctica in ancient times gives us a sense of connection to something larger, a sense that our story stretches further than we realize. It plays into the universal fascination with lost civilizations and forgotten chapters of history, just as myths like Atlantis captivate us because they suggest advanced cultures erased by catastrophe. The idea of early Antarctic visitors appeals because it implies we're not the first to confront the mysteries of the frozen continent. On the other hand, skeptics caution against reading too much into anomalies. They point out that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that so far, none has been found. Fossils show animals and plants, not humans. Artifacts from early visitors are absent. The logistical challenges of reaching Antarctica with ancient technology were immense. From this perspective, the absence of proof is meaningful. If humans had been there, we would expect at least some trace to remain, and so far, none has emerged. The debate, they argue, is more about human imagination than human history. But imagination is part of the story too. People dream about footprints in the snow, not because they expect to find them tomorrow, but because the possibility gives Antarctica an extra layer of significance. It becomes more than just a frozen wasteland. It becomes a stage on which human history might have played out in ways we don't yet understand. That dream, even if unproven, keeps curiosity alive, and curiosity often leads to discovery. Whether or not humans ever walked on Antarctica in ancient times, the fact that we continue to ask the question shows how deeply we're drawn to mystery. Some researchers even suggest that the value of the debate isn't improving early visitors, but in reminding us how fragile evidence can be. Most of Earth's history is gone, erased by time, erosion, and change. Whole civilizations have vanished in deserts and jungles, leaving behind only fragments. In Antarctica, where ice swallows everything, the odds of survival are even lower. If humans did ever visit, the chances of finding proof are slim. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. It means the record is incomplete, as it always is. The debate keeps us aware of those gaps. Ultimately, the question of human footprints in Antarctica may remain unanswered for a long time. The ice is too thick, the continent too remote, the evidence too scarce. But the debate itself matters. It keeps us looking, keeps us questioning, keeps us aware that the story of humanity may not be as straightforward as we assume. And whether or not we ever find proof of early visitors, Antarctica will continue to hold its place as one of the greatest mysteries of Earth. A land that invites us not only to study, but to wonder. And that wondering is important because in the end, the debate about human footprints in Antarctica isn't just about history, it's about possibility. It's about the recognition that the world still has places we don't fully know, that the past still has secrets to reveal, and that our curiosity is the one tool that can bridge the gap between science and imagination. The Earth we know is not fixed. Continents drift, climates change, ice comes and goes, and even the poles themselves shift over time. When we think about civilization, we often picture it as rooted in place, tied to geography, rivers, coasts, and fertile soil. But what if the very ground under those civilizations was not as permanent as we imagine? What if shifts in Earth's axis or in the distribution of land and sea forced whole cultures to move, to adapt, or to vanish? This idea has haunted researchers, storytellers, and explorers for centuries, and it is one of the reasons Antarctica attracts so much speculation. If the poles have not always been where they are today, could civilizations have existed in regions that later became frozen wastelands? Could human history include chapters in which entire cultures were displaced southward only to be erased by the shifting of the planet itself? The concept of shifting poles isn't just imagination. Earth's axis has wobbled many times over its history, a phenomenon called axial precession, which alters the orientation of the planet relative to the stars on cycles of about 26,000 years. There are also true polar wander events when the outer shell of the Earth shifts relative to its rotational axis, moving continents closer to or farther from the poles. These processes happen over geological timescales, but they remind us that the positions of continents and climates are not fixed. Antarctica, for instance, was not always locked at the South Pole. Hundreds of millions of years ago, it was part of Gondwana, located farther north in temperate latitudes. Even after drifting southward, it went through warmer periods when ice had not yet fully covered it. What interests those who speculate is how these shifts might have affected human or proto-human civilizations. If Earth's axis tilted differently, climates would have changed dramatically. Areas once fertile could become deserts. Regions once temperate could become frozen. Cultures rooted in those places would either adapt or disappear, and their memory could be reduced to myths. Could it be that Antarctica was once one of those regions? A place where a civilization thrived only to be swallowed by ice when the pole shifted? Some versions of this theory argue that the last great ice age, which ended about 12,000 years ago, could have shifted the balance of Earth's crust. The idea is that massive amounts of ice accumulating at the poles caused a redistribution of weight, altering Earth's orientation slightly. While mainstream science doesn't fully support catastrophic pole shifts happening so quickly, the possibility of smaller gradual shifts is accepted. These shifts could have been enough to change climates worldwide. In that window, advocates of alternative history suggest entire civilizations might have been displaced. Myths from many cultures speak of catastrophic floods, frozen lands, and lost homelands. The biblical flood, the Sumerian flood epics, and similar stories from indigenous traditions across the globe all point to a memory of sudden change. Some interpret these as recollections of rising seas at the end of the Ice Age, when glaciers melted and coastlines were submerged. Others connect them to the possibility of pole shifts, arguing that the Earth's axis moved suddenly enough to transform climates and displace people. If that were true, then Antarctica could easily fit into these stories as a homeland lost to ice. There's also the matter of unexplained anomalies. Some researchers point to magnetic readings in Antarctica that don't align with what we expect from geology alone. Others highlight satellite images that appear to show structures beneath the ice. Mainstream explanations focus on natural causes, but speculation sees something more. Evidence that a civilization once existed there, erased when the poles shifted and the continent froze. Even if these interpretations stretch the data, the allure remains strong because the combination of hidden landscapes and uncertain history creates the perfect environment for speculation. The idea of shifting poles also ties into the enduring fascination with Atlantis. Plato described a civilization that vanished in a single day and night, destroyed by floods and earthquakes. While he placed it beyond the Pillars of Hercules, later interpretations have relocated it all over the world. Some theorists connect Atlantis directly to Antarctica, suggesting that the pole shift moved it from a temperate latitude to the South Pole, burying it under ice. In this view, the myth of Atlantis is not just allegory, but a distorted memory of a real event, an advanced culture displaced by planetary change. Whether this is true or not, the narrative resonates because it combines natural processes with human drama, turning geology into history. From a scientific perspective, there's no direct evidence of such civilizations. The fossil record shows plants and animals, but not humans, in Antarctica's warmer periods. Archaeological finds elsewhere trace human development in Africa, Europe, and Asia, with no clear signs of Antarctic settlements. Yet, the lack of evidence doesn't end the conversation. The sheer difficulty of accessing Antarctica means that large portions of its history remain hidden. Until we can drill through ice sheets miles thick or explore subglacial valleys in detail, the possibility remains open, at least in the realm of imagination. What's undeniable is that shifting poles and changing climates have repeatedly altered the course of human history. The end of the last ice age reshaped coastlines, drowned land bridges, and forced migrations. Cultures living on once fertile plains were displaced by deserts. Rising seas cut off communities, turning connected regions into islands, even without invoking lost civilizations. We know that humans have been deeply affected by Earth's shifting balance. It's not a stretch to wonder whether some of those shifts might have erased entire societies that left a little trace. Antarctica, hidden under ice, becomes the most dramatic candidate for such a possibility. This theory also appeals because it challenges our sense of permanence. We like to think of continents and climates as fixed, but they are not. Mountains rise and fall, oceans advance and retreat. The poles drift. Civilizations build themselves on what seem like stable foundations, but the Earth itself is always moving. To imagine a culture in Antarctica, displaced by a shifting pole, is to recognize how vulnerable we are to forces beyond our control, is both humbling and unsettling. A reminder that the ground we stand on is never truly permanent. Some even argue that the myths of gods, or advanced beings descending from the sky, could be memories of survivors from such a displacement. If a civilization once lived in Antarctica and was forced to flee as ice advanced, they might have carried their knowledge to other parts of the world, appearing to less advanced societies as extraordinary beings. Again, there's no proof of this, but it fits into the pattern of speculation surrounding pole shifts. It provides a way to connect myths from disparate cultures to a single event, making sense of scattered traditions by rooting them in a dramatic geological change. The debate often circles back to one central question: could Antarctica have supported humans in any of its past climates? Fossil evidence shows it was once lush, even subtropical. Geological records indicate that it experienced multiple warm periods, some as recent as a few million years ago. But by the time modern humans appeared, the ice was already dominant. Still, what if small windows of opportunity existed? What if coastal areas remained habitable longer than we think? Without direct exploration beneath the ice, we can't entirely rule it out. And because we can't rule it out, the imagination continues to fill the gap. Even if civilizations did not originate in Antarctica, The idea of them moving south is intriguing. Cultures throughout history have migrated in response to climate. When drought struck, people abandoned cities. When ice sheets retreated, they moved into new lands. If pole shifts or climate swings altered conditions drastically, it's conceivable that people might have ventured southward, at least temporarily. Perhaps they reached subantarctic islands, or even the fringes of the continent itself, leaving behind faint traces that were later erased. The debate isn't just about whether humans live there permanently, but whether they could have passed through, leaving echoes in myths and maps. In the end, the idea that civilizations could have been displaced by shifting poles is less about proving a specific theory and more about confronting the fragility of history. We know that much of human existence is undocumented. We know that natural forces have reshaped the planet again and again, and we know that Antarctica remains largely unexplored beneath its ice. Together, these truths keep the speculation alive. Whether or not a civilization ever moved south and vanished there, the possibility symbolizes how much we don't know, how much we may never know, and how much of history is still hidden under layers of time and ice. When people talk about archives of history, they usually mean libraries, old manuscripts, or archaeological sites. Yet, one of the greatest archives on Earth doesn't sit on shelves or in museums. It rests locked inside the very ice of Antarctica, preserved in layers that stretch back for hundreds of thousands of years. Each layer of snow that fell, compressed, and frozen over time, became a page in a book, written not with ink, but with air bubbles, dust, and trapped chemicals. These layers, drilled out as ice cores, are records of Earth's climate and atmosphere, more detailed than anything else we have. They hold the memory of our planet, frozen in place, waiting to be read. The concept is simple, but powerful. Every year, snow falls in Antarctica. Instead of melting away in the summer, most of it remains, slowly compacting under the weight of new snow above it. Over thousands of years, this snow turns to ice, preserving within it the composition of the air at the time it fell. Trapped inside tiny bubbles are samples of ancient atmospheres, direct records of carbon dioxide, methane, and other gases. Dust particles tell us about volcanic eruptions, desert winds, even asteroid impacts. Chemical isotopes reveal temperatures from the time the snow first landed. Layer upon layer, year upon year, these frozen records build up into a continuous timeline. When scientists drill deep into the ice and pull out cores, they're not just collecting frozen water, they're unrolling the history of Earth itself. Some cores go back nearly 1 million years. In Antarctica's east ice sheet, cores drilled at sites like Dome C and Vosto have revealed climate cycles stretching through multiple ice ages. These cores show patterns of warming and cooling, rising and falling greenhouse gas levels, and dramatic shifts that shape the evolution of ecosystems and eventually human societies. It is astonishing to think that by holding a cylinder of ancient ice, a scientist can directly touch the air that mammoths breathed or that drifted over Earth before humans even existed. This is history not inferred, but preserved, a kind of time travel made possible by the patience of falling snow. The story told by ice cores is one of cycles. Over and over, the data shows ice ages advancing and retreating in rhythm with changes in Earth's orbit and tilt. Greenhouse gases rise and fall in tandem, amplifying the swings. In warm periods, carbon dioxide levels climb, glaciers retreat, and seas rise. In cold periods, gases drop, ice expands, and deserts spread. These cycles are written clearly in the ice, repeating like the turning of pages. They remind us that climate is never static, that the world humans inherited was already shaped by long patterns of change. But they also show something new. In recent centuries, greenhouse gas levels have risen far above anything recorded in those ancient layers, driven not by natural cycles, but by human activity. The ice makes that unmistakable. This is part of why the cores are so valuable. They don't just tell us about the past, They provide context for the present. By comparing today's atmosphere to those frozen records, we can see how extraordinary our impact has been. The sharp spike in carbon dioxide in the industrial era stands out like a flare, unlike anything, in nearly 1 million years of cycles. The ice tells us with quiet certainty that what is happening now is not normal. It is a disruption without precedent in the preserved memory of Earth. Beyond climate, ice cores also reveal unexpected events. Layers of ash correspond to volcanic eruptions, some so massive they changed global weather. Spikes in certain isotopes hint at cosmic rays or solar activity. Even traces of meteoritic material have been found, marking ancient impacts. These details show that Earth's history is not just a slow rhythm, but punctuated by sudden shocks, events that altered conditions overnight. To read these signatures in ice is to glimpse the drama of the planet across millennia, preserved in the simplest of forms. Frozen water falling year after year. For those who speculate, the idea of ice as memory opens other possibilities. If the ice can preserve air, dust, and ash, could it also preserve more unusual things? Some imagine that beneath miles of ice, traces of ancient civilizations might be hidden, sealed away in layers we have not yet drilled. Artifacts may be unlikely, since the cores mostly capture atmospheric samples, but the imagination stretches further. Could signals of human presence older than we expect be locked in those bubbles waiting to be detected? If civilizations rose and fell in deep prehistory, could faint traces of their impact on the atmosphere survive in the ice? While mainstream science finds no evidence for this, the question lingers because the cores are so complete in every other respect. They hold the memory of forests, deserts, volcanoes, and oceans. Why not also the memory of people if they were there? Some alternative researchers suggest that odd anomalies in core data, sudden spikes or unexplained shifts, might be more than natural events. They see in these patterns the possibility of lost histories, moments when humans or other advanced beings might have influenced the planet long before recorded time. Scientists counter that the anomalies are explained by natural processes from volcanic winters to solar cycles. But as long as the ice remains largely unread, speculation has room to grow. The image of the ice as a library is powerful because it reminds us that memory can take many forms. Human memory is fragile, fading in a generation. Written memory lasts centuries or millennia if preserved carefully. But the memory in ice stretches back almost 1 million years, unbroken and silent, holding stories no human ever witnessed. When we read it, we step outside the narrow window of our own history and see ourselves against the backdrop of geological time. It is humbling, unsettling, and inspiring all at once. It also highlights how much is still unknown. Current cores reach back 800,000 years, but deeper drilling could go further, perhaps capturing records from over 1.5 million years ago. Each new core is like opening a new volume in a series, adding context to what we already know and filling in missing details. Scientists continue to push for deeper, cleaner, more precise drilling, because each meter of ice pulled up is another page of Earth's diary recovered. And just as importantly, each core teaches us to think not only about what we know, but about what we don't. The process of drilling itself adds to the drama. Imagine standing in the middle of Antarctica, surrounded by nothing but ice and sky, lowering equipment 2 meters down into the frozen ground. For weeks or months, scientists endure harsh conditions to retrieve a cylinder only a few inches across. Yet inside that cylinder lies the record of tens of thousands of years. It is both fragile and priceless, a sliver of history that could melt away if not carefully preserved. The dedication required to collect and study these cores underscores how valuable they are, how much we depend on them to understand the planet we live on. For many, what makes the ice cores so compelling is not only the science, but the symbolism. They remind us that Earth remembers everything, every volcanic eruption, Every shift in the atmosphere, every change in temperature, leaves its mark. Nothing disappears completely. It is all written somewhere, waiting to be read. In that sense, the ice cores are like a reassurance that even in a world of constant change, memory persists. We may lose our records, our buildings, even our civilizations, but the planet itself keeps its own record, indifferent to whether we are paying attention. This can be comforting or frightening, depending on perspective. Comforting, because it means the truth is always preserved. Frightening, because it means the record of our current actions is also being written layer by layer into the ice. Thousands of years from now, if anyone drills into the cores of today, they will see the mark of our carbon emissions, our industrial age, our sudden impact, our stories becoming part of Earth's frozen memory, whether we like it or not. And so the ice becomes more than just frozen water. It becomes a witness to ancient forests, to volcanic fire, to shifting poles, to human industry. A silent observer that holds everything, waiting for someone to ask the right questions and drill down to the answers. That is what makes Antarctica's ice not just a scientific tool, but a profound reminder of our place in history. It tells us where we came from, where we are now, and perhaps even where we are going. And it does so without judgment, simply preserving the truth in frozen layers that endure long after we're gone. When scientists first began mapping Antarctica in detail, they expected the main challenges to be ice, cold, and distance. What they didn't expect was strange readings from their instruments, measurements that didn't quite make sense. As radar and magnetic surveys expanded across the continent, patterns emerged that seemed too irregular to be explained easily. These anomalies, invisible to the eye, but revealed by sensors, suggested that beneath the ice lay features unlike anything seen elsewhere. Some were explained as quirks of geology, variations in rock type or density. Others remain more mysterious, places where the magnetic field doesn't behave as expected, where instruments register unusual spikes or disturbances. It is in these places that scientific curiosity and human imagination intersect, because every true anomaly invites speculation about what it might mean. The Earth's magnetic field is usually predictable. It's generated by the motion of molten iron in the planet's core, and while it drifts and shifts over long periods, its local variations can often be tied to specific geological features. Large deposits of iron-rich rock, for instance, create anomalies where the magnetic field is stronger. Faults and fractures in the crust can distort the field as well. But in Antarctica, some anomalies defy simple explanation. When surveys fly over certain regions, instruments record disturbances so strong they suggest massive buried structures, things that don't match the surrounding geology. One of the most famous of these is in Wilkesland, an area deep in East Antarctica. Satellite data has revealed a circular magnetic anomaly more than 150 meters across. Some scientists suggest it could be the remains of a massive impact crater created by an asteroid that struck Earth millions of years ago. If true, it would rival the Chicxulub crater in Mexico, linked to the extinction of the dinosaurs. Such an impact in Antarctica could have triggered enormous climate shifts, perhaps even playing a role in past ice ages. But because the anomaly is buried under miles of ice, direct confirmation remains elusive. For others, the circular shape is enough to inspire speculation about artificial origins. Could it be a buried city, a structure left behind by an ancient civilization, or even something extraterrestrial? Mainstream science does not support these claims, but the lack of definitive answers keeps the theories alive. Elsewhere, smaller anomalies appear in radar scans, places where subglacial topography seems unusually symmetrical or patterned. Natural geology can create strange shapes, but when the patterns resemble triangles or straight lines, people inevitably wonder whether they are natural at all. The human brain is wired to see order in chaos, to find patterns, even when none exist. and so images of Antarctic anomalies circulate widely, interpreted as pyramids, fortresses, or other structures. Most are eventually explained as mountains, ridges, or ice formations, but the fact that they are buried, inaccessible, and ambiguous makes them powerful symbols of the unknown. Magnetic anomalies also raise questions about the history of the continent itself. Some suggest that they could be linked to geothermal activity beneath the ice. Volcanic hotspots and rifts can produce unusual magnetic signatures. In fact, researchers have discovered that Antarctica has more volcanoes than once thought, many of them hidden beneath the ice. These volcanoes could explain some anomalies, as magnetic minerals in volcanic rock often differ sharply from surrounding formations. Yet the scale of some anomalies seems too large, too distinct, leading others to believe that something more lies beneath. The mystery deepens when you consider that Antarctica has shifted dramatically over geological time. What is now buried under ice might once have been exposed, perhaps even inhabited. If anomalies mark ancient craters, they tell stories of cosmic impacts that reshape the planet. If they mark volcanic zones, they reveal a hidden landscape of fire beneath the frozen surface. And if, as some claim, they mark artificial structures, then they suggest an entirely different history, one where civilizations, or even other forms of intelligence, left their mark in the most unlikely place. For those drawn to speculation, the magnetic puzzle is irresistible. Unlike fossils or ice cores, anomalies are less tangible. They exist as data points, numbers on instruments, images from satellites. They can be interpreted in many ways, and interpretation is where imagination takes over. A scientist may see a dense mass of rock. A storyteller may see the outline of a buried city. Both are working with the same evidence, but the conclusions diverge depending on the lens through which they are viewed. This is part of why Antarctica's anomalies attract so much attention. They are real, measurable, undeniable, but not yet fully explained. Some even tie these anomalies to myths of hidden knowledge. If ancient civilizations once existed, could they have left behind structures or technologies that now distort magnetic readings? Could the anomalies be the fingerprints of forgotten history? There is no hard evidence for this, but the question persists because the anomalies are so unusual. And while most scientists favor geological explanations, even they admit that the full story may not be known until more direct exploration is possible. In recent years, the anomalies have also drawn attention because of their possible link to climate change. Geothermal heat beneath the ice, concentrated in certain regions, may be contributing to melting. If magnetic anomalies mark areas of volcanic or tectonic activity, they could play a significant role in how Antarctica's ice sheets behave. Understanding them isn't just about solving mysteries, it's about predicting the future of sea level rise and climate systems that affect the entire planet. This adds urgency to the study of anomalies, blending scientific necessity with speculative allure. It's worth noting that Antarctica is not unique in having magnetic puzzles. Similar anomalies exist in other parts of the world, from Canada's Hudson Bay to Siberia. Often, these are linked to ancient geological events, such as asteroid impacts or shifts in Earth's crust. But Antarctica's anomalies stand out because they are hidden under ice, inaccessible and mysterious. We can measure them, but we can't see them. That difference turns ordinary geological quirks into enduring enigmas. For those who imagine Antarctica as the site of lost civilizations, the anomalies are often presented as evidence, the first hints of something extraordinary waiting beneath. Stories circulate about massive walls or tunnels, detected by radar about restricted zones where governments supposedly conceal discoveries. While most of these claims lack verification, they thrive because Antarctica's remoteness prevents easy reputation. The truth is buried literally under layers of ice that no one has penetrated. Until direct exploration is possible, the anomalies remain open to interpretation. Even within the scientific community, there is an acknowledgement of how much remains unknown. The Wilkesland anomaly, for example, is still debated decades after its discovery. Is it a crater, a geological formation, something else entirely? Each new survey adds data, but the puzzle is not solved, and that uncertainty is what keeps the fascination alive. The anomalies are not just curiosities, they are reminders that Earth still has secrets, that even in the age of satellites and global mapping, parts of our planet remain uncharted in their details. The magnetic puzzle also challenges how we think about history. We often imagine human civilization as unfolding in a straight line, from primitive beginnings to modern complexity. But anomalies suggest gaps, interruptions, mysteries that don't fit neatly into the story. Even if they turn out to be purely geological, they still force us to reckon with how much we don't know, how much lies outside the boundaries of certainty. They keep alive the possibility that history may not be as complete as we think. What makes these anomalies so compelling is that they bridge science and imagination without needing to be embellished. They are real measurable disturbances in Earth's magnetic field. They have been recorded by instruments and studied by researchers. That is enough to make them significant. But because they are buried under ice, invisible to the naked eye, they also invite endless speculation. They are puzzles without clear solutions. And puzzles have always drawn human curiosity. And so the anomalies under Antarctica remain both scientific challenges and speculative playgrounds. They remind us that the continent is not just ice and rock, but a place of hidden complexity. They show that even in the most remote part of Earth, there are still mysteries waiting to be solved. And whether those mysteries turn out to be craters, volcanoes, or something more, the fact that they exist keeps Antarctica alive in our imagination as a land of secrets beneath the ice. When most people think of Antarctica, they imagine a place that is completely open and untouched, a vast wilderness of snow and ice, where anyone could, in theory, set foot as long as they're willing to endure the cold. The reality is more complicated. Antarctica is governed by international agreements that make it one of the most restricted and regulated places on Earth. Access is controlled, research is limited to certain areas, and entire regions are designated as off-limits to protect the environment, or for reasons that aren't always explained in detail. For some, these restrictions make perfect sense. Antarctica is fragile, and human activity can damage it irreparably. But for others, the limits feed into speculation. Why, in a place so empty, should there be so many rules? Why can't people simply go wherever they choose? And could these restrictions be about more than just environmental protection? At the heart of it is the Antarctic Treaty signed in 1959 and still in force today. This treaty sets Antarctica aside as a zone dedicated to peace and science. It prohibits military activity, mining, and nuclear testing while allowing international cooperation in research. On paper, it is one of the most idealistic agreements ever created, turning an entire continent into a kind of reserve for the benefit of all humanity. But the treaty also places strict controls on access. Only authorized scientific expeditions and carefully managed tourism are allowed. Many regions remain closed, designated as protected areas where human presence is forbidden. These include wildlife sanctuaries, nesting sites, and unique ecosystems that could be disrupted by even minor interference. From a scientific perspective, this is logical. Antarctica's ecosystems are delicate, often adapted to extreme conditions in ways that make them vulnerable to disturbance. A single careless introduction of foreign microbes could alter environments that have remained isolated for millions of years. This is especially true for subglacial lakes, where drilling and contamination are constant concerns. By limiting access, researchers hope to preserve these environments for study without destroying what makes them valuable in the first place. In this light, restrictions are about conservation, not secrecy. Yet, the very existence of forbidden zones invites suspicion. When people hear that entire areas of Antarctica are closed to outsiders, they naturally wonder what has been kept hidden. Some speculate that governments know more than they admit, that ancient ruins, unusual structures, or unexplained phenomena lie beneath the ice, and that restrictions are in place to prevent public discovery. Satellite images that show blurred sections or anomalies only add fuel to these theories. While most of these blurred areas are the result of image stitching errors or environmental obscuring, they feed into a broader sense of mystery. Why in the most remote part of Earth are there places no one can visit? Even without conspiracy theories, there are practical reasons for restrictions. Antarctica is dangerous. Weather can change instantly, with winds strong enough to tear apart camps and temperatures low, enough to kill unprepared explorers within minutes. Creases hide under snow, invisible traps that can swallow vehicles or people. Many off-limits areas are designated that way, not because of hidden secrets, but because they are simply too hazardous to risk. Rescue is often impossible in such conditions, and allowing open access would almost certainly lead to disaster. In this sense, forbidden is more about safety than concealment. Still, history shows that restrictions can sometimes hide more than danger. During the Cold War, Antarctica became a stage for quiet competition between superpowers. Though the treaty forbade military activity, both the United States and the Soviet Union maintained bases that raise suspicions. Some believe secret research projects were conducted under the guise of science. Nuclear-powered stations, radar installations, and other facilities were sometimes shrouded in secrecy. Even today, some research projects are not fully transparent, and their goals are unclear to the public. This lack of openness creates fertile ground for speculation about what might truly be happening in the most inaccessible parts of the continent. Stories circulate of strange encounters and discoveries. Some claim that expeditions stumbled upon unusual formations beneath the ice, only for those areas to be quickly declared off-limits. Others tell of scientists who saw things they could not explain, then returned home and refused to speak about them. These accounts are often second-hand, passed through layers of rumor and embellishment, but in a place so isolated, where so few people have first-hand knowledge, such stories thrive. They feed the belief that Antarctica hides more than science admits. One of the most persistent ideas is that certain mountains or structures detected in radar scans resemble pyramids or artificial shapes. While geologists explain these as natural noon attacks, mountain peaks poking through the ice, others see them as evidence of a lost civilization. When areas near these formations are declared restricted, the speculation intensifies. Why not allow open study? Skeptics ask, unless there is something to hide. The scientific response is that restrictions protect fragile geology and ecosystems. But suspicion lingers because the shapes themselves spark imagination. There is also fascination with rumors about underground facilities. Some believe that during the mid-10th century, governments, or even private organizations, built hidden bases beneath the ice. Tales of Nazi expeditions to Antarctica in the 1930s and supposed secret bases in later decades have become part of the mythology of the continent. While historical records confirm German expeditions, there is no solid evidence of lasting bases. Still, the idea persists, reinforced by the difficulty of proving what does or doesn't exist beneath miles of ice. And when areas are officially closed, the connection seems obvious to those inclined towards speculation. These are the places where something is hidden. Even for those who reject such theories, there remains a sense that Antarctica is one of the least accessible places on Earth by design. Unlike most of the planet, where tourism, trade, and exploration are common, Antarctica resists intrusion. The permits are required, regulations are strict, and enforcement is strong. This gives it an air of exclusivity. Only scientists, specialists, and a limited number of tourists can visit. For the rest of the world, Antarctica is seen from afar, through filtered reports and carefully managed expeditions. That distance alone makes it feel forbidden. At the same time, the restrictions have a very real scientific payoff. Because Antarctica is so protected, it remains one of the last relatively pristine environments on Earth. Pollution is minimal compared to other continents. Species that exist nowhere else still survive there. Ice cores and fossils are preserved in conditions that would be impossible elsewhere. In this sense, the forbidden nature of Antarctica is a kind of gift. By keeping it off limits, humanity has managed to preserve a rare laboratory where Earth's past and future can be studied with minimal interference. And yet, imagination will always turn forbidden places into mysteries. When explorers are told not to go somewhere, they wonder what they would find if they ignored the rule. When satellite images blur a section, people assume there is something extraordinary beneath. When governments restrict information about certain expeditions, people fill the gaps with stories of discoveries too shocking to reveal. Antarctica, with its vast hidden landscapes and limited access, provides the perfect setting for these kinds of speculations. The forbidden zones become symbols of what we don't know, reminders that even in the 21st century, parts of Earth remain out of reach. For scientists, the restrictions are practical. For dreamers, they are suggestive. Both views coexist, shaping how people think about Antarctica, and perhaps that is fitting. The continent is at once a scientific preserve and a land of imagination. Its forbidden zones embody that duality, protecting fragile environments while also fueling the sense that beneath the ice, secrets wait. Whether those secrets are natural wonders, ancient fossils, or something more, the fact that we cannot see them ensures that the fascination will endure. Few stories of the ancient world have captured the imagination as deeply as Atlantis. First described by Plato more than 2,000 years ago, Atlantis was said to be a powerful civilization that vanished in a single night and day of catastrophe, swallowed by the sea. Since then, countless generations have searched for it, speculated about it, and reinterpreted it in ways that suit their own times. For some, Atlantis is pure myth, an allegory invented by Plato to make a philosophical point. For others, it is a half-remembered truth, the distorted memory of a real place lost to history. And among the many theories about where it might have been, Antarctica stands out as one of the most compelling candidates. The connection between Atlantis and Antarctica rests on several points. First is the idea of a lost civilization erased by natural disaster. Antarctica, as we know, was not always buried under ice. Fossils and sediments reveal that it was once green, temperate, and even subtropical. If a civilization had developed there during one of its warm periods, the advance of ice could have wiped it out entirely, leaving no visible trace. In that sense, Antarctica fits the core theme of Atlantis, a thriving land suddenly destroyed and hidden from the world. Second is the problem of geography. Plato placed Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which many interpret as the Strait of Gibraltar. From there, the description is vague enough to allow many possibilities. Some argue it was in the Atlantic Ocean, others in the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, or even Southeast Asia. Antarctica enters the debate because of maps like that of Piri Reis, which some believe show the continent long before its official discovery. If ancient knowledge of Antarctica survived into early modern times, it suggests that civilizations long before may have known of it as well. And if they knew of it, perhaps they lived there. The idea gained strength in the 20th century when theories of pole shifts became popular. According to some interpretations, Earth's crust may have shifted dramatically at some point in the distant past, moving entire continents to new latitudes. If that were true, then Antarctica might once have been much farther north, in a climate capable of supporting advanced societies. In this view, the story of Atlantis is not just allegory, but memory. The tale of a civilization that flourished on what is now Antarctica, then perished when the poles shifted and the land was engulfed by ice. Mainstream historians dismiss this as speculation, pointing out that there is no solid, archaeological evidence for advanced civilizations in Antarctica. The fossil record shows plants, animals, and even dinosaurs, but no humans or human-like activity. By the time humans evolved, Antarctica was already frozen. But for those drawn to the Atlantis connection, this doesn't matter. They argue that evidence may still lie buried under miles of ice, inaccessible to us. Just because we haven't found it yet, doesn't mean it isn't there. The sheer scale of Antarctica makes it the perfect hiding place. The parallels between Plato's story and Antarctica extend beyond catastrophe and geography. Atlantis was described as a land rich in resources, with fertile soil, abundant metals, and a powerful navy. In its warmer epochs, Antarctica would indeed have been fertile, supporting forests and rivers. Some speculate that its mountains might conceal mineral wealth even now, hidden under ice, and off-limits by international treaty. In this sense, the image of a resource-rich continent cut off from the world resonates strongly with Plato's tale. The idea of abundance followed by destruction fits both narratives. There are also cultural parallels. Many myths around the world describe lands that were lost, drowned, or frozen. Flood stories appear in Mesopotamia, India, the Americas, and beyond. Legends of hidden lands to the south are found in Greek and Polynesian traditions. While these may reflect separate cultural memories of natural disasters, some believe they point to a single origin, a global civilization whose center was lost in catastrophe. Atlantis, in this theory, is not just one city, but a symbol for a network of cultures wiped away by planetary change. If so, Antarctica is the ultimate candidate for their hidden homeland. The allure of this theory isn't only in evidence, it's in symbolism. Atlantis has always represented more than a lost city. It represents the idea of forgotten greatness, of knowledge and power erased from history. When people connect it to Antarctica, they are not just suggesting a geographical location, they are proposing that beneath the ice lies proof that humanity's story is much older and stranger than we think. Atlantis becomes a metaphor for all the mysteries hidden under the glaciers, whether they are ruins, fossils, or simply landscapes we cannot yet reach. Critics argue that the Antarctica-Atlantis connection is built on weak foundations. Plato's descriptions of Atlantis include details that don't match Antarctic geography. His story was likely meant as a moral lesson about hubris, not a historical account. And the supposed evidence, maps, anomalies, and myths can often be explained in more mundane ways. But the persistence of the theory shows that it speaks to something deeper than factual proof. People want to believe in lost civilizations, in hidden chapters of history. Antarctica, with its inaccessibility and mystery, is the perfect canvas for those beliefs. Even within mainstream science, there are discoveries that keep speculation alive. The presence of ancient shorelines beneath the ice shows that Antarctica once had open seas and fertile coasts. Subglacial lakes like Visto contain isolated ecosystems that have survived for millions of great years. Magnetic anomalies hint at structures we can't yet identify. Each of these discoveries is significant on its own, but together they form a picture of a continent that still holds countless secrets. And where there are secrets, Atlantis finds a home. The fascination with Atlantis in Antarctica is also fueled by cultural narratives. Books, documentaries, and films have woven the two together, creating stories of explorers finding ruins beneath the ice, or scientists uncovering evidence of advanced technology frozen for millennia. These stories, while fictional, reinforce the association in the public mind. Over time, the idea of Atlantis in Antarctica becomes less about historical accuracy and more about a shared cultural myth. It is part of the larger human need to imagine golden ages and lost worlds, to see the past as richer and more mysterious than the present. The theory also carries warnings. Plato's Atlantis was not just a civilization that vanished by accident. It was destroyed because of arrogance, corruption, and excess. In linking Atlantis to Antarctica, some interpreters see a cautionary tale for our own time. If civilizations could vanish before, overwhelmed by forces beyond their control, then so could ours. Climate change, rising seas, and environmental collapse all echo the themes of Atlantis. In this way, the story resonates not only as a mystery of the past, but as a mirror of the present. Whether Atlantis truly lies under Antarctica may never be known. The ice is too thick, the continent too vast, the evidence too elusive, but the theory will endure because it satisfies both curiosity and imagination. It provides a place for the legend to exist, far away and hidden, yet real enough to keep the dream alive. And even if it is never proven, the very act of asking the question keeps Antarctica in the realm of myth as well as science, a place where the boundaries of history blur into legend. In the end, the allure of Atlantis in Antarctica is not just about geography, it's about the human drive to find meaning in the unknown, to connect myths to real places, to believe that our story is longer and grander than we know. Atlantis is the ultimate symbol of mystery, and Antarctica is the ultimate land of secrets. Together, they create a narrative too powerful to fade, one that will continue to inspire explorers, scientists, and dreamers as long as the ice conceals its truths. Speculation about ancient civilizations almost always begins in familiar places: fertile valleys, river deltas, warm coasts where agriculture could thrive and trade could flourish. Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, China, these are the regions where we know civilization rose and the evidence is solid. But then there are the other places, the ones that don't fit so neatly into the established record. Places like Antarctica, where direct evidence is absent, but where conditions in the distant past might have been very different. The question is simple but powerful. What if they were here? What if beneath the ice there are traces of human societies that lived in climates long since erased, their homes and cities sealed away for millions of years? The idea seems improbable at first. By the time modern humans evolved, Antarctica was already covered in ice. The fossil record shows forests, animals, even dinosaurs, but no people. Yet, imagination does not stop there. Instead, it asks, what if our timeline is incomplete? What if civilizations existed long before we recognize them? Or, if fragments of human or pre-human cultures reached Antarctica in warmer intervals? History is full of surprises, and archaeology keeps rewriting itself. Every time we find evidence of humans migrating earlier than thought, or artifacts in places considered unreachable, the story expands. Antarctica remains one of the last blank spots on the map, and blank spots are invitations. Imagining civilizations in Antarctica begins with climate. Fossils confirm that the continent was once lush and green. Forests stretched across its surface, rivers flowed, and animals thrived. For millions of years, parts of Antarctica looked less like a wasteland and more like new lush. Southern South America today. Could people have lived there in those times? If human ancestors, or even unknown intelligent species, occupied Antarctica during its planned habitable phases, their traces would now be buried under miles of ice. And because ice preserves as well as it conceals, those traces might still exist, untouched and waiting. The possibilities go further. Subglacial lakes like Vosto, Mercer, and Whillins show us that entire ecosystems can survive, sealed beneath ice for millions of years. Microbes adapted to the dark and pressure live there, thriving in conditions we once thought impossible. If simple life can endure such isolation, could evidence of more complex life survive too? Imagine a society adapting not only to warm climates, but also to cooling ones, moving into valleys and caves as glaciers advanced, but leaving behind artifacts in pockets of land now sealed away. Science hasn't found such evidence, but the imagination can easily supply it. Some take the speculation further still. They suggest that myths of lost civilizations like Atlantis may be distorted memories of cultures that once lived on Antarctica before ice consumed it. The idea of a flourishing land wiped out by sudden catastrophe fits well with the image of a green Antarctica swallowed by glaciers. Legends of southern lands appear in Greek thought, Polynesian tradition, and even South American folklore. Could these be distant echoes of people who knew Antarctica not as frozen emptiness, but as a habitable world? Skeptics respond with timelines. The warm periods that made Antarctica green mostly ended millions of years before humans appeared. But proponents of early civilization theories counter with questions. How sure are we about the exact timing of human development? Could there have been advanced cultures before Homo sapiens, ones we no longer recognize? Could there be entire chapters of history erased not only from memory, but from the visible world, leaving only hints in myths and anomalies in data? Mainstream science says the evidence isn't there, but the very absence of evidence is precisely what keeps speculation alive. Antarctica's inaccessibility makes it the perfect candidate for a story of hidden civilizations because so little of it can be studied directly. Even within conventional archaeology, discoveries have shown that humans reach places far earlier than once believed. Sites in the Americas suggest migration tens of thousands of years before the standard models allowed. Stone tools have been found in locations that force a rethinking of routes and timelines. Each new discovery shows that our species was more adaptable, more adventurous, and more widespread than earlier theories admitted. Against this backdrop, imagining human footprints in Antarctica feels less like wild fantasy and more like an extension of those surprises. If we continually underestimate what ancient humans were capable of, then maybe, just maybe, we've underestimated their reach too. Satellite imagery adds another layer to the speculation. Photos sometimes show geometric shapes in the ice. Triangles, straight lines, symmetrical patterns. Most of these are explained as natural features. Mountains called nunats, ice formations shaped by wind and pressure, or shadows playing tricks on the eye. But to people primed to see civilization, they look like ruins, pyramids, temples, walls. Even if these interpretations stretch beyond the evidence, they continue to circulate because the images are real. The patterns exist. What they mean is open to debate. And where debate exists, imagination fills the void. Magnetic anomalies deepen the intrigue. Readings in places like Wilkesland suggest massive buried structures or craters. Scientists lean toward geological explanations, such as asteroid impacts or unusual rock formations. But others ask, what if there's something else? What if those anomalies are the signatures of technology or architecture buried beneath the ice? Without direct exploration, the question remains unanswered. And unanswered questions are fertile ground for speculation about civilizations it was forgotten. The idea also ties into a larger theme in human history, the rise and fall of societies. Time and again, civilizations have flourished only to collapse, leaving ruins behind. From the Mayans to the Indus Valley, from Mesopotamia to Easter Island, we see the same pattern of growth, achievement, and decline. What if Antarctica represents another chapter in that cycle? One erased, not by war or resource depletion, but by climate itself. If ice advanced quickly enough, entire cities could be entombed in days or weeks, preserved as if frozen in amber. This image resonates because it matches both what we know of natural forces and what we fear about our own fragility. There is also the matter of restricted zones. Some areas of Antarctica are off-limits to all but a handful of researchers. Officially, these restrictions protect fragile ecosystems or hazardous regions. But for those who suspect more, they are signs of secrets. If civilizations once existed under the ice, wouldn't governments want to keep those discoveries hidden until they could be controlled or explained? Again, there is no proof of this, but the combination of limited access and unexplored landscapes fuels the belief. Antarctica's vastness allows such ideas to survive because so few people have the chance to confirm, or deny them. Even in the absence of ruins, the imagination lingers on what kind of culture might have thrived there. Would they have been seafarers, trading across southern oceans, farmers cultivating fertile valleys in the warmer epochs, or something entirely different, adapted to polar conditions we can hardly imagine? Stories of giants, advanced beings, or gods descending from the skies may be mythological reflections of such a culture. Survivors fleeing as ice advanced could have carried fragments of their knowledge to other parts of the world, seeding myths that persist today. For many, this is the real allure of imagining civilizations in Antarctica. It isn't about proving that they existed with physical evidence, but about exploring what it would mean if they had. It forces us to question the completeness of our history. It reminds us that what we know is always a fraction of what once was, and it opens the possibility that human civilization is not as young or as linear as textbooks suggest, but part of a much deeper, more complex story. Science may one day provide clearer answers, drilling deeper into the ice, exploring subglacial valleys, and analyzing anomalies with better technology could reveal whether the speculation is fantasy or possibility. Until then, Antarctica remains a blank page, and on blank pages, humans have always written their most powerful stories. Whether those stories are true or not is almost secondary to the fact that they exist. They shape how we see the world, how we think about ourselves, and how we imagine what lies beyond the boundaries of the known. So what if they were here? What if beneath the glaciers lie the remains of cities, tools, or even entire cultures frozen in silence for tens of thousands of years? Maybe we'll never find them. Maybe there's nothing to find. But the act of asking the question matters. It keeps alive the sense that history is not finished, that discoveries are still possible, and that mystery still survives in our world. And perhaps that is why the idea of civilizations in Antarctica endures, not because we have proof, but because we have imagination. Antarctica often feels like a place outside of time, a continent so vast and isolated that it seems untouched by the rise and fall of civilizations. Yet, when we look closer, Antarctica doesn't only hold stories about the past, it also holds lessons about the future. Buried in its ice are records of Earth's climate, signals of changes long before humanity existed, and warnings about what might come next. In its frozen wilderness, we can see not only what has been lost, but also what might be at stake for us if we fail to listen. Antarctica is both a mirror and a teacher, showing us truths about resilience, fragility, and the consequences of ignoring natural limits. One of the clearest lessons comes from the ice cores. These frozen cylinders are like scrolls of history, each layer a snapshot of Earth's atmosphere over hundreds of thousands of years. They tell us that climate is not fixed, but moves in cycles, that the planet has swung repeatedly between ice ages and warm periods. They also tell us something more unsettling. The pace of change today is unlike anything in the ancient record. Carbon dioxide levels that once rose and fell slowly over tens of thousands of years have skyrocketed in just a few centuries. Methane spikes are sharper and higher than anything recorded in nearly 1 million years. The ice shows us with calm indifference that what we are doing now is unprecedented, and the lesson is clear. Our actions can reshape the planet's climate in ways we are not prepared for. Antarctica also teaches us about thresholds. Ice is stable for a long time, but it can collapse suddenly. In the geological record, we see evidence of ice sheets retreating in rapid bursts, raising sea levels by meters in just a few decades. These aren't distant possibilities. They are realities the planet has experienced before. The frozen shelves of West Antarctica, already thinning and fracturing, remind us that massive systems can appear solid until they reach a tipping point. Once that point is crossed, change is swift and irreversible. The lesson here is not just about Antarctica, it's about us. Civilizations depend on stability, on predictable seasons and coastlines. If the ice collapses, seas rise, and climate shifts violently, our own stability could vanish just as quickly. Another lesson is about interconnection. Antarctica may seem remote, but what happens there affects everywhere else. Winds that circle the continent drive ocean currents across the globe. The Southern Ocean absorbs carbon dioxide and heat, buffering the rest of the planet from more extreme warming. Ice reflects sunlight, helping regulate global temperatures. When Antarctica changes, the whole system shifts with it. Melting glaciers pour fresh water into the seas, altering salinity and currents. Retreating ice exposes darker land and ocean, which absorb more heat and accelerate warming. The continent teaches us that no place is truly isolated. What happens at the poles shapes the tropics, the deserts, the forests, and the cities where we live. To treat Antarctica as separate from our daily lives is to ignore how tightly woven the Earth systems are. Beyond climate, Antarctica shows us the power of resilience. Life exists there against all odds. Penguins, seals, and whales thrive in conditions that would kill most creatures. Microbes flourish in subglacial lakes, sealed away for millions of years. Plants cling to rocky outcrops, surviving on almost no soil or warmth. These organisms adapt, endure, and persist in the harshest environment on the planet. Their lesson is not about comfort, but about survival, about the ability to find ways of living, even in extremes. For us, this is both inspiring and sobering. It shows that life can endure even when conditions are hostile. But it also shows that survival often comes at the cost of simplicity and limitation. Civilizations built on abundance and complexity may not adapt as easily as microbes in the ice. There is also a lesson in humility. Antarctica remains one of the least explored places on Earth. Much of what lies beneath its ice is unknown, and even with satellites and advanced instruments, mysteries endure. We do not know the full extent of its subglacial mountains, valleys, and lakes. We cannot yet explain every anomaly in its magnetic fields or radar images. The lesson is simple but profound. We do not know everything. In an age where humanity often feels it has conquered the planet, Antarctica reminds us that vast regions remain beyond our understanding. This humility is essential if we are to face the future wisely. Ignorance is not weakness. It is an invitation to learn, to approach with caution, and to avoid arrogance in the face of forces larger than ourselves. For those who imagine lost civilizations beneath the ice, Antarctica offers another kind of lesson. Even if no ruins exist, the idea itself is meaningful. It reminds us how easily entire chapters of history can be erased. Cities fall, empires vanish, and even if they leave ruins, time eventually buries them. If Antarctica teaches us anything about civilization, it is that permanence is an illusion. The ice may hide secrets, but even if it hides nothing more than forests and fossils, it still shows us how fragile memory can be. What we build today may not survive tomorrow, and the only way to endure is through knowledge and adaptation, not through walls of stone or monuments of steel. Antarctica also forces us to confront the tension between protection and exploitation. For now, it is protected by treaties that ban mining and militarization, preserving it for science and peace. But those protections are not guaranteed forever. The minerals under its mountains and the resources in its seas tempt nations and corporations. As global pressures grow, so does the risk that Antarctica will one day be seen as a prize rather than a preserve. The lesson here is about restraint. The continent shows us the cost of exploitation, how fragile ecosystems can be disrupted, how climate can be altered, but it also shows us the value of cooperation. The Antarctic Treaty is one of the few examples in history of nations agreeing to set aside territory not for conquest, but for shared stewardship. That model, fragile though it is, may be the most important lesson Antarctica offers, that cooperation is possible even in a world often divided. Another lesson lies in the very ice itself. When scientists drill cores and study bubbles of ancient air, they're reminded that the planet remembers. Nothing we do truly vanishes. The soot from ancient fires, the ash from volcanoes, the trace gases from industry, all of it is recorded. The Earth keeps its own history whether we write it down or not. In this sense, Antarctica is like a witness, silent but exact. The lesson here is accountability. Our actions today will be visible to future generations, not just in ruins or records, but in the very fabric of the planet. Long after our cities crumble, the ice will remember what we did. That truth should shape how we act now. Even the myths tied to Antarctica carry lessons. Stories of Atlantis, of lost lands, of civilizations erased by catastrophe. All of them reflect human anxieties about fragility and survival, whether or not such civilizations ever existed beneath the ice. The myths themselves speak to our recognition that nature is powerful, that change is sudden, and that pride can lead to downfall. In connecting these myths to Antarctica, we are really telling ourselves a story about limits, about the need to respect forces greater than us. The lesson is not about proving legends true, but about understanding why we keep telling them. They are warnings written in narrative form, and Antarctica provides the perfect backdrop for those warnings. Ultimately, the lessons of Antarctica converge on a single point. The future depends on whether we listen. The ice is melting faster than expected, and the consequences are global. Rising seas threaten cities, shifting currents disrupt weather, and ecosystems collapse under the strain. These are not distant possibilities. They are unfolding now. Antarctica is telling us what is coming as clearly as it once told us about the past through its cores and layers. The lesson is urgent. To ignore it is to risk repeating the fate of those civilizations we imagine lost. To heed it is to recognize that the choices we make today will determine whether our own story continues or ends. Antarctica doesn't speak with words, but with silence, with wind, with ice breaking into the sea. Its lessons are not hidden, they're visible to anyone willing to look. The continent teaches patience through its slow cycles, urgency through its sudden collapses, humility through its vast mysteries, and accountability through its frozen records. These are not abstract ideas. They are practical truths about how civilizations survive or fall. If we can learn from them, Antarctica may be less a graveyard of lost worlds and more a guide to preserving our own. There is something unusual about the way Antarctica lingers in the mind. Unlike other continents, it resists being neatly categorized. Africa is celebrated as the cradle of humanity, Europe as a stage of empires, Asia as vast and ancient, and the Americas as lands of discovery and upheaval. Antarctica stands apart, not because it lacks history, but because its history is hidden. Every attempt to understand it leaves more questions than answers. Every expedition uncovers more layers of complexity beneath the ice. And so as we step back from the details and the theories, from fossils and maps and anomalies, what remains is a feeling, an awareness that this frozen world is less an empty space than a vast, echo chamber reflecting both the past and the future of Earth. For centuries, humans ignored Antarctica, not because they didn't imagine it, but because it was unreachable. The Greeks theorized about a great southern land, the Terra Australis. To balance the world they knew, cartographers sketched it at the edges of their maps, a blank shape that gave the globe symmetry. Even when no one had seen it, Antarctica existed in imagination, and when it was finally sighted in the 19th century, it seemed at first to be nothing but an endless, sterile expanse. Yet the more we learned, the more we realized it was anything but empty. It was a library of climates, a fortress of ice, a refuge for species that defied survival, and perhaps even a vault of mysteries we had not yet uncovered. The lesson of this progression is clear. Antarctica has always been more than it appeared. To think of it as farewell is misleading because no one can really leave Antarctica behind once they've encountered it, even through stories. It has a way of reshaping how we think about time. A glacier does not move at human speed. An ice core does not care about lifetimes. The continent exists in a scale that dwarfs cities, dynasties, even civilizations. For those who stand on its shores, there is an awareness that everything human is temporary compared to the persistence of ice. And yet the ice is not eternal. It shifts, melts, breaks apart, drifts into the sea. The paradox of Antarctica is that it is at once ancient and fragile, enduring and precarious. To say goodbye is really to acknowledge that its silence continues after we stop listening. The dreams tied to Antarctica are as varied as the people who imagine them. For some, it is the dream of exploration, of setting foot where few have gone, of braving a land that tests endurance. For others, it is the dream of discovery, of finding fossils that rewrite evolutionary history or cores that unlock climate secrets. For still others, it is the dream of lost civilizations, of cities or temples preserved beneath the ice. Each dream says as much about us as it does about the continent itself. Antarctica is a canvas onto which humanity projects its fears, hopes, and questions. It reflects back not just the light of the sun on its glaciers, but the longings of the human mind. This reflective quality makes Antarctica one of the most symbolic places on Earth. Its whiteness suggests purity, but it conceals scars of ancient volcanism and cosmic impacts. Its silence suggests emptiness, but it hides teeming life in its seas and resilient microbes in its frozen soils. Its remoteness suggests irrelevance, but its influence on climate, currents, and seas makes it central to the fate of the entire planet. Every contradiction deepens its mystery. Every contrast reinforces the sense that Antarctica is not just a place, but a presence. When we think about the echoes of time in Antarctica, we are forced to confront our own scale. Dinosaurs once lived there, when forests grew where glaciers now tower. Mammals roamed its coasts millions of years ago. Even in its frozen age, it has recorded human impact. From industrial soot to rising greenhouse gases, the continent remembers more than we do. Its ice contains the whispers of eras we can barely imagine, and those whispers will outlast us. To dream of Antarctica is to admit that time is vast and that we'll only a fleeting note in the symphony it preserves. At the same time, Antarctica draws us into the future. The fate of its ice sheets will shape coastlines, economies, and societies. Its seas will determine the health of marine life across the globe. Its climate signals will dictate weather far from its borders. In this sense, Antarctica is not just a reminder of what has been, but a warning of what is to come. The echoes we hear in its ice are not just of the past, but of our own choices reverberating forward. The dream of Antarctica is not only a dream of mystery and memory, but also of consequence. What is striking is how often Antarctica humbles those who confront it. Explorers speak of feeling insignificant, scientists of being overwhelmed by its scale. Even the most pragmatic visitors admit that the continent changes how they think about Earth. It forces them to reckon with the reality that our world is not ours alone, that human time is a fraction of planetary time. This humility may be one of the greatest gifts Antarctica offers. In a world where arrogance often drives destruction, humility is a rare and necessary resource. There's also something strangely comforting in imagining that secrets may still be hidden there. In an age when satellites map every street and drones photograph every mountain, Antarctica reminds us that mystery has not vanished. Entire mountain ranges remain buried, valleys unseen, lakes sealed away for millions of years. Even if no lost civilization waits beneath the ice, the possibility of discovery endures. The echoes of time are not silent. They're invitations, calling us to listen more closely, to look deeper, to question more boldly. In this way, Antarctica resists being just another place. It insists on being an enigma, and so the farewell we give to Antarctica is not an ending, but a pause. It is the recognition that our time with it is always brief, that we can only glimpse fragments before we must leave. But in that brief encounter, we gain something lasting. We gain perspective on history, on nature, on ourselves. We see that civilizations rise and fall, that climates shift, that memory is fragile, and that the planet endures beyond us. We see that imagination is as much a part of Antarctica as ice and rock, because without imagination, the continent is only white emptiness, while with it, it becomes a universe of possibilities. To dream of Antarctica is to dream of endurance, of silence, of secrets. To hear its echoes is to hear not just the story of Earth, but the story of humanity, our curiosity, our ambition, our longing to connect with something greater. Perhaps that is why Antarctica feels like farewell and return at the same time. It sends us away with more questions than answers. Yet, it also pulls us back, reminding us that mystery is never gone as long as there is ice, silence, and imagination.